Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto is blessed by Fairy Kami in Fairy Tail. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Isom and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. Betrayal and Ascension. Life sucks. These words can be taken up by one Naruto Uzumaki as he fought against his best friend at the Valley of the End. Naruto's life had pretty much sucked ever since he was born. When he was born, a massive nine-tailed fox attacked and was sealed inside his stomach by the fourth Hokage. Sadly, the villagers needed something to vent their anger on. The result was Naruto's tortured childhood. He was given overpriced rotten food to eat, had little to no friends, and was treated like a leper. There were days, specifically his birthday, when people got rowdy. That tends to happen when people get drunk. Thankfully, at that point, Naruto was pretty good at hiding. In the Ninja Academy, Naruto's life didn't improve. He made little to no friends because of his status as a pariah. On top of that, the many teachers would sabotage his work, so he became known as the class idiot and was the dead last of his year. While some teachers didn't sabotage him, the Jinchuriki thing did work against him by giving him more chakra than the average genin at his age. As a result, Naruto had trouble doing simple techniques like clones, substitutions, and transformations. As a result, he was labeled a lost cause since the teachers didn't want to put in the extra work. Naruto also had to play the part of an idiot because it helped keep the villagers off his back, especially the shinobi. Naruto had contemplated leaving, but he couldn't. He had nowhere to go. He had no family to speak of, alive or dead, and he had a feeling that once he stepped foot outside the village, without a guide, there would be a massive fox hunt. He managed to graduate, after 3 failures, by mastering an A-rank technique called the Shadow Clones, which he could use with extreme ease and beat the tar out of a traitor to the village. After graduating, he was put with the Rookie of the Year, Sasuke Uchiha, and his #1 fangirl, Sakura Haruno. Their sensei was Kakashi Haddock, a perverted jonin who spent most of his time reading smut. Their first test resulted in Naruto being tied to a post, even though Sakura did nothing the entire test but hide. Right away, Naruto realized Kakashi was just like the rest of the villagers. He hated him for the Kyuubi and did his best to sabotage Naruto by refusing to train him. He focused all his time on Sasuke training the arrogant emo prince. He did the same in the Chunin exams, saying Sasuke needed him more because he was fighting a psychopath named Gaara. Naruto in the meantime had to fight Neji Hyuga, who had no problems nearly killing his own cousin. With the help of the self-proclaimed super pervert, Jiraiya, Naruto learned summoning. He beat Neji and would later beat Gaara by summoning the Toad boss, Gamabunta. Later, Naruto would learn another A-rank technique called the Rasengan and save the life of one Tsunade Senju, who was going to be the 5th Hokage. Despite all this, nothing changed. The villagers all passed on Naruto's accomplishments to Sasuke because they didn't want to believe that the demon could actually do something incredible. Now, Sasuke, who believed Konoha was holding him back, had decided to ditch the village for Orochimaru, one of the village's greatest traitors. Naruto and some of the other rookies, Shikamaru, Chajui, Kiba and Akamaru and Neji, had all been chosen to retrieve him. The team had beaten all their opponents with the help of 3 Suna shinobi. Now Naruto stood off against his fellow genin in a fight that would decide. Sasuke had activated a curse seal he had on his neck and had gone into a second state that turned his skin gray, his hair purple, gave him a black mark on the bridge of his nose, and turned the sclera of his eyes black. Naruto was currently wrapped up in a cloak given by the use of the Kyuubi's chakra. He had a large fox tail and 2 large fox-like ears on his head formed by the cloak. The two glared at each other across the way of the 2 statues of the Valley of the End. Naruto formed a large spiraling ball of chakra in on hand, while Sasuke gripped what like a ball of lightning. The two launched at each other. Rasengan. Chidori. The two clashed with a loud bang. A massive black orb formed in the middle of the waterfall, and there was a loud explosion. When the smoke faded, it showed Naruto and Sasuke lying down on the ground. Obviously, the fight had taken a lot out of them. Meanwhile, a man in jonin attire with gravity-defying silver hair, a headband slanted over one eye and a face mask saw the whole thing. With him was a mole brown pug that had a darker brown snout, ears, he had a blue vest that had a seal on the back, and a headband like Naruto's and the silver-haired man. "Well, what do you know?" The pug said in a deep gruff voice that was very deceptive for his cute appearance. The kid actually won. "Well, it looks like you won't need me anymore, Kakashi. See you later." The pug vanished in a puff of smoke. Kakashi stood up and clenched his fist. He had seen the jutsu Naruto had used. How dare the dead last use one of the 2 jutsus that the Yondaime, his sensei, used? How dare this demon pervert one of the jutsu that made his sensei famous? Kakashi walked forward and leaned down next to Sasuke and began to heal him using a medical jutsu that he had copied. After a moment, Sasuke began to stir. Sasuke rose up with a pained look on his face. What happened? The Uchiha asked. Then he remembered and turned to glare at the unconscious blonde next to him. "Easy Sasuke," Kakashi said as he walked towards Naruto and started to pick him up. The movement woke Naruto, who stirred slightly. "Sensei?" Naruto asked as he saw the familiar hair. What are you doing?" Kakashi answered, "This is for the best, Naruto. Sasuke is going to kill you and rid the world of the Kyuubi. At the same time, he is going to gain the next phase of his Sharingan, the Mangekyo, and return to Konoha." Naruto's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." Kakashi simply lifted Naruto up and said, "Oh, I am. And I'm sure the Godame will give him some leeway when she hears of how he had to kill you because you had lost control of the Kyuubi's chakra and went on a rampage." Naruto tried to get away from Kakashi, only to feel a seal get pressed onto his back. He could feel the Kyuubi's chakra stop healing him and the pain returned from his shoulder wound. Sasuke, having heard Kakashi's words, smirked. With this he would be able to get one step closer to avenging his clan. Not only that, but he couldn't let it get out that the dead last had defeated him. Naruto was at the bottom of the totem pole for a reason. The sound of chirping birds reached Naruto's ears as he saw the Chidori active on Sasuke's hand. The Uchiha had that same infuriating smirk on his face. "You should be happy, dope," Sasuke said, "with your death, you will be helping me get one step closer to being able to kill my brother. You should be glad you'll be of use to a great clan such as mine." But that Sasuke pulled the attack back and shoved it through Naruto's chest. The whiskered blonde coughed up blood as the attack shredded his lung and nicked his heart, causing it to bleed. Sasuke had a triumphant grin on his face. It fell when he realized something. He didn't feel any stronger. He didn't feel any rush of strength, nor did his Sharingan feel changed. What happened? He was supposed to get stronger with Naruto's death. That's what Kakashi just said. Naruto's pained chuckling reached his ears. Sasuke glared at Naruto, who was just laughing. "You actually think I thought you were my friend?" Naruto rasped, "An arrogant prick like you? I tolerated you, Sasuke. When I'm dead you'll gain nothing. You lose." He then turned to Kakashi and said, "Congrats, sensei. It looks like you are just as much trash as this duck-haired bastard. When you die I'll be waiting." But that last word, and a smirk that infuriated Kakashi, the light left Naruto's eyes. The young ninja had died. Sasuke growled in anger as he was denied the power he so rightly deserved. It was necessary to end his brother and finally avenge his clan. The boy went through hand signs and yelled, "Fire release." Great fireball technique. Sasuke only released a few sparks as he found that he had too little chakra left after the battle. The strain of using the level 2 curse seal hitting him like a runaway cabbage cart. The boy then pitched over and fell right next to the now dead blonde. Kakashi sighed as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a blank scroll. He removed the suppression seal he placed on high before sealing away Naruto's body in it and sheathed it on his belt. While he hated doing so, he didn't want to risk Orochimaru getting his scaly mitts on Naruto's body, especially if any of the Kyuubi's chakra was still left in Naruto's body. He then picked up Sasuke and headed back to Konoha. He looked up as clouds began to gather in the sky before rain began to fall. Kakashi looked up, believing that the heavens were crying with joy at the destruction of the nine-tailed beast. "Finally, you can rest in peace, sensei." Unknowingly, Kakashi and Sasuke's actions had just started Konoha's death clock. In a high plane of existence. "Damn, that silver-haired bastard." The image of Naruto being killed and burned was seen in a mirror. The mirror was on the wall of a very extravagant-looking room. In the room were several individuals. The one who yelled was a woman with long red hair and purple eyes wearing Jonin garb. Though you couldn't tell her eyes were purple because she had an epic scary face on as she radiated crimson energy while her hair waved around like octopus tentacles, her face completely shadowed with only round white circles in place of her eyes. The second was a man with spiky blonde hair with two long sideburns running down the sides of his face. He wore a Jonin-like attire under a long white trench coat with the words "Yellow Flash" written on the back with red flames imprinted on the bottom. The third was a man long brown hair cut short on top with two locks wrapped in bandages framing either side of his face. His eyebrows were cut short and his eyes had blue marking around them, which were turned up in the corners. He wore a high-collared, light-colored kimono held closed by a dark sash. On the collar were several magatama decorating it. Under the kimono was a full-bodied suit. The fourth had short spiky brown hair with two locks wrapped in bandages and framing either side of his face. He wore a headband with a metal plate, replacing the ninja headband only without the symbol. He wore the same outfit as the other man. The fifth was a tall and pale-skinned man with deep wrinkles. He had spiky, shoulder-length pale red hair with a chin-length braid hanging in front of his left ear. He had a long beard. He also had two horn-like protrusions on his head. He had purple eyes with a black dot as a pupil and ring-like pattern around it and a red marking that in the middle of his forehead. If you looked at his palms you would see a light-colored circle on his right palm and a dark-colored moon on his left. The sixth was a tall man with featureless wide eyes and horn-like protrusions on his forehead. He had no eyebrows and long light-colored hair with bangs combed to the left and a single chin-length lock that hung from the right side of his face. He wore a light full-length kimono with a pattern of 6 black magatama around the collar and dark pants. He had a sword strapped to his left hip and a dark crescent moon on his left palm. In order they were Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze, Minato Namikaze, Indra Otsutsuki, Asura Otsutsuki, Hagoromo Otsutsuki, and Himura Otsutsuki. As mad as they were, there were 3 people who seemed angrier. The first was a woman with beautiful tanned skin. Her tanned skin was a contrast to her long snow-white hair. Her golden eyes were filled with anger. Her curvaceous body was covered by a pure white battle dress with a window cut out that showed off some of her chest and cleavage. Her dress ran down to her ankles, her feet were covered with white boots that went up to her calves. The second was just as curvy as the first. In contrast, her skin was pale and hair was pitch black and done up in pigtails. She had bright purple eyes. Her attire consisted of a black corset with dark purple highlights down the center. Her lower half was covered by a skirt that went to her knees and was a little loose. Her feet were covered with black boots. In her hands was a black staff with a large double-bladed scythe that had the kanji for hell on one end and the kanji for heaven on the other. The third woman was also curvy. She had short green hair that went down to her neck. Her eyes were a deep brown color. She wore a deep green top that revealed her cleavage in her midriff. Lower half was covered by tight pants and what looked like hiking boots. Over her top was a brown leather jacket that had the image of vines wrapping around her arms. In order they were Kami, Shinigami, and Tozi. Damn humans, Shinigami said, do they really believe that Naruto is a demon? Do they have such little faith in their leader and my power? Kami reached out and said, calm down sis. There is no need to go crazy. At least not yet. Tozi nodded and said, yes, there are other matters we must focus on. I told you that you shouldn't have sealed the fox into Naruto. I told you. The 3 goddesses turned to see Kushina was tearing into Minato furiously, even though she had been doing so since the day that they died. I know. I screwed up. Minato yelled back at his wife, don't you think I feel bad enough about what has happened to our child? Kushina yelled, no. Hagoromo shook his head and asked, how far the world has fallen. If Tobirama and Hashirama were here, no doubt they would weep at how far their beloved village has fallen. Amura nodded and said, I must agree brother. The ninja world has fallen into chaos because of the gift given to them. Asura crossed his arms and said, it is truly heart-wrenching to see my reincarnation put through such pain. Indra nodded and said, yes, and mine has become so horrible. At least after my defeat I began to mellow out. Kami walked forward and said, all right, I believe we are all in agreement. Everyone looked at the goddess and nodded. Kami reached out and snapped her fingers. Ashes began to form and rose from the ground. They began to mix together in a small twister before growing bigger and forming a skeleton. After a few more moments, muscle and sinew began to form and then skin. Orange cloth began weaving into existence on the body. In a matter of minutes Naruto was back and alive. What the hell? Naruto looked at his hands, shocked to be alive. The next thing Naruto knew, he was enveloped by a powerful hug and being squeezed like crazy. All Naruto could tell was a lot of red color. Oh, Sachi. I missed you so much. Naruto then pushed away from the powerful hug despite the woman's bizarre strength. Naruto stepped back away from the duo. Then he saw him. The blonde-haired man behind her. Hi. Minato said awkwardly. Naruto's look became angry. You. The next thing the dead cage knew, he was tackled to the ground. Before he could gain his bearings, he found himself being beaten in the face by Naruto furiously. You bastard. Do you have any idea what you put me through? Do you have any idea the suffering I had to endure because of you? Why did you choose me? Why? Kushina managed to pull the boy off her husband. Naruto was now thrashing around in her arms. Minato got up off the ground and said, okay, I deserved that. Naruto writhed in Kushina's arms. Tears of anger were running down his cheeks. He stopped and just started crying. Why did you pick me? Naruto asked. The older blonde answered, because you're my son. Naruto froze. There was a brief silence. Kushina let her son go. Minato approached slowly. Naruto then threw out a leg and kicked the man between the legs. Minato let out a cry of pain as he fell to his knees, clutching his injured body. The other guys in the room all winced at the strike to the balls. Kushina then wrapped the blonde around the boy's shoulders and hugged him tightly. Does that mean you're my mom? Naruto asked. The red-haired Kunoichi smiled and said, yep, Kushina Uzumaki. The red hot-blooded habanero and second Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, Databane. Naruto blinked and laughed and said, wow. Now I know where I get my verbal tick, Databeo. The older Uzumaki giggled cutely. As she snuggled Naruto tightly, like she had hoped to do when he was a toddler. She then made the mistake of rubbing Naruto's cheek. Naruto purred. Kushina pulled back in shock as Naruto looked very embarrassed. She was then hugged him squealing, "Cute." Naruto continued to purr in his mother's embrace, though he tried to get out of it, but it was very difficult given Kushina's incredible strength. The three goddesses smiled and Kami said, "As much as I hate to break up the touching family moment, we have business to get to." The young ninja looked up at the three women and blushed slightly at how pretty they were. "Naruto," Kushina said, "may I introduce Kami, Shinigami, and Tozi, the three goddesses, and the Akatsuki family, the family of the Sage of Six Paths." Naruto looked at his mother, then the three goddesses and the people who started the ninja world, not that he knew that last one of course. Naruto looked at them briefly, brining in their features as he realized that they were not only telling the truth, but he could feel the incredible power coming off them. He could have sworn he heard a voice in his head say, "Holy shit," but he pushed that aside. Naruto blinked in shock before finally bowing deeply to the three goddesses. Naruto wasn't that big on manner or tact, but even he knew that you shouldn't mess with divine beings. Ami smiled and said, "There is no need to bow before us, Naruto. We have brought you here for a reason." Naruto answered, "What? What reason do you have to talk to me about?" Ami answered, The world has become a dark and desecrated place. The gift of chakra given by the Sage of Six Paths has been abused over the years. Even the person who was supposed to have the power of the Six Paths has been corrupted. We want you to bring peace to the world." Naruto blinked and said, "Peace? What are you talking about? Wait, aren't you three our goddesses? Can't you do something?" Tozi spoke up and said, "Unfortunately, ancient laws passed by creatures older than us prevent us from involving ourselves in the world of mortals. We are, however, able to choose champions to fight for us on the mortal plane." Shinigami nodded and said, "Yeah, you are the only one. There is another person from your village who has caught the attention of a few of our siblings. I believe his name was Itachi." Naruto's eyes widened at the name of the Akatsuki member who he had seen before. He flinched slightly as he remembered the cold, emotionless eyes that the Uchiha clan murderer. "Are you crazy?" Naruto yelled. "I may have a grudge against Sasuke, but Itachi, that guy murdered his entire clan on a whim. Why the hell would he do that?" Ami stepped back, surprised at the boy's words. Then she held out her hand. A portal appeared in front of them. Curious, Naruto approached the portal and was surprised to see a conversation between the Sandaime and a younger Itachi. He heard them speak about how the Uchiha clan was planning a coup. How Itachi had been forced to choose to kill them to prevent it. He could see the regret in Itachi's eyes as he was given the order. Afterwards, it showed Itachi being inducted into the Akatsuki. He saw the tears of anger running down his cheeks and his wail of absolute sorrow. Naruto blinked in shock. He had no idea. It also meant that Sasuke wasn't even fighting for the right reason. His thoughts turned dark as his mind went back to Kakashi and Sasuke for what they did to him. Killing him for power and doing so because of some stupid old grudge. It also made Naruto wonder what would happen if Sasuke ever found out the truth. Naruto was brought out of his thoughts when Kami spoke. "There is more than just that, Naruto," Tozi said. "The man you called a grandfather is not the man you knew him to be." Naruto looked at the nature goddess with a confused expression. "What do you mean? The old man was always there to help me when I needed it." Ami waved her hand again and there was another image shown. It showed the old man talking with his advisors, two people whom the blonde knew hated him. They seemed to be talking about how they should have Naruto as a weapon for their village, nothing new to most. What shocked Naruto telling them that he agreed. How he told everyone in the village his status because he knew that they would react badly to this information. Ordering certain Anbu to make sure Naruto would be caught in certain bad situations and others to save him. Also he would have a reason to have some connection to the village. If that wasn't enough to hurt Naruto's image of the old leader, the image rewound a few years to show the four meeting again and planning the downfall of a country called Uzushio. He saw the younger Sarutobi give orders to sabotage the seals protecting the village and ignore all calls for help. He saw the village fall, with his mother being led to Konoha. The image then began to fast forward showing a younger Naruto having special seals placed on his body that would further cripple him, all provided by the bandaged old advisor, Danzo, if he heard right, only to have the seals be burned off by the Kyuubi's influence. The elder ninja present looked upset at the new information, especially Kushina, as displayed by her hair rising and waving around like the tails of a certain giant fox. The Otsutsuki siblings looked upset as well. He was shocked to find out that this was to bring the Kyuubi to Konoha so they would have a weapon against the other villages. Naruto fell to his knees in shock. His grandfather figure, the man who laughed at his pranks and welcomed him into his life with open arms, was a fraud. He didn't see him as a monster, but he only saw him as a weapon and a tool. Naruto felt like his world had just shattered. The trio gave Naruto a couple of moments to get his head together. Like we said, the world is corrupt. There are other examples, such as your treatment as a child. The bloodline massacre in Kiri, the abuse of the Biju to create the Jinchuriki and their abuse. We want this to end. We want to bring true peace to the elemental nations. Naruto blinked in shock. What did you mean by bring peace? What do you want me to do? Ami smiled and said, we will bless you with power from all three of us. We have also found someone to teach you. And I mean really teach you, not like the lazy Cyclops or that perverted hermit. Someone to bring you real power. Naruto blinked in surprise. What do you get in return? Naruto asked, I highly doubt that such a great honor would come without a cost. The three grinned as they looked at each other. Those he said, simple boy. First, we want you to destroy Konoha. That village has become a corrupt shadow of its former self. Not just the village, but others who believe themselves above the laws of nature and to be gods in human skin. Naruto's thoughts went to Orochimaru when he heard that remark. The goddess of light answered, the world has become a shadow of its former self. Your ancestor, the sage of six paths, gave chakra to the world in hopes that it would help the world. Instead it has led to a war-stricken world. For you to complete this mission Naruto, you must bring peace to the elemental nations. Naruto's eyes widened slightly. He was wondering why they were giving him this mission. Naruto is honored, Buddha was also nervous as this was a very tall order. Naruto was quiet as he thought, which brought slightly concerned looks from those around him. Naruto then pushed aside his doubts. If they believed that he could do it, then he would give it his all. A steely reserve formed in the boy's eyes. So, what do you think of our offer? Shinigami asked, are you willing to accept the job? Naruto was quiet for a minute. Then he said, yeah, on one condition. I get to wipe out Konoha. It's high time that village got what was coming to it. The three nodded. Kushina and Minato looked at each other. Kushina was happy her son decided to join them and bring down that corrupt village. If not just for his own revenge, but for what they did to his home country and his people. Minato looked upset slightly at his old village, but he quickly squashed the feeling. Ami stepped forward and said, as Kami I bless you with my power over light. You can heal any wound, physical and mental, revive the dead. She leaned down and kissed his left cheek, causing him to blush and leaving a white lipstick mark. Shinigami stepped forward and said, as Shinigami I bless you with the power over darkness. You can cause any injury, manipulate the darkness. She leaned down and kissed the boy's right cheek, leaving a purple lipstick mark. Tozi then said, as Tozi I bless you with the power over nature. You can freely communicate with animals of all kinds, and I give you knowledge of every jutsu on earth. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, leaving a green lipstick mark. The three marks then glowed brightly as they faded. Naruto then felt a huge rush of power run through his body. Naruto groaned in pain before taking a few steps back and rubbed his head. Oh man, the blonde boy said, I feel like I just chugged down a huge barrel of energy drinks. Kushina said, come on now Gaki. We can start your training tomorrow. For now, though, I'd like to catch up with my son and I think you'd like to meet your other teachers. But that the Uzumaki Namikaze clan members and the Akatsuki clan members began to leave. The three goddesses just stood there and watched. So that's him, huh? The three goddesses turned to see two new figures entered the room. They were a man and woman. The man was rather tall, standing over 6 feet, nearly 7 feet. His body was covered with muscle showing he was built for both speed and power. His skin was tanned. He wore a black lined gold vest with a white shirt with a long pair of black pants and combat boots. There were black arm guards on his forearms. The man's eyes were gold and reptilian-like and on his bared upper arms were patches of what looked like lizard scales. The woman looked incredibly young. She had long, wavy blonde hair that reached down to her feet with a single lock pointed upwards, large green eyes that didn't have under eyes, and her build was childlike. She wore a frilly pink layered robe with a red ribbon tied in a bow around her neck. Around the chest were 3 diamond patterns with 2 blue triangles above. Each of these series were outlined in hot pink. On her head were wing-like adornments around her ears and small hoop earrings. She also lacked shoes. Ami smiled and said, yes, that is the child of prophecy we told you about. The man scoffed and said, the little runt didn't seem like much. The woman elbowed the man in the gut and said, oh, quiet Bahamut. You can see if he is worthy. Give the kid some time to relax and rest. Besides, if I remember correctly, you value family. Isn't that why you called the dragons back in Earth and Land? Bahamut muttered something under his breath and said, be quiet Mavis. The now identified Mavis giggled and said, so when will he go to my world? I'd like to see his face when he learns about magic. Ami answered, eventually. I want him to gain good control of his powers before he starts learning from you Bahamut, no offense. Bahamut shrugged and said, I understand. My methods can be brutal. But that the 5 figures began to walk away from each other. Meanwhile, on the large mountain filled with toads a certain one shifted. The toad was incredibly large, easily eclipsing a building. He was brown-colored with a white belly. He was incredibly wrinkles, and his eyes were squinting. He wore a professor's hat with tassels and an orb on top of it. Around its neck was a necklace that had the kanji for oil on it. This was Gamamaru, the great toad sage. There were walls lined with scrolls all around this toad. The toad shifted as he felt something off. He reached out with a webbed hand. He pulled the scroll from the wall and opened it. His squinted eyes widened as he saw the words on the scroll be rewritten. Gamamaru wheezed slightly and said, "The prophecy has changed." Chapter 2. Aftermath and Training. The village of Konohagakure stood by the gates with bated breath. Some were waiting for the return of Sasuke Uchiha, the last remaining member of one of their strongest clans. Many of the village had been trying to pamper Sasuke so he would see them in a favorable light, and when he rose to the title of clan head, he would repay them. Girls were after him because they believed that one day they would marry Sasuke and live the easy life, as they would have a very prominent name. Two such individuals were Ino Yamanaka and Sakura Haruno, two diehard Sasuke fangirls. There were others who were waiting for Naruto to return. The first was Hinata Hyuga, a girl who had a huge crush on Naruto since the academy. The second was Tsunade Senju, the fifth Hokage and Naruto's godmother. The third was Shizune, Tsunade's assistant. The others waiting for the boy were Gaara, Temari, and Kankuro, who had been called in on the mission as backup. "Where are they?" Sakura asked. "That baka had better keep his promise." Ino nodded and said, "Yeah. If he has done anything to Sasuke, I'll tear his mind apart." Off to the side, Hinata gave a soft glare at the two. The two were so focused on Sasuke that they didn't seem to care about anything else. Ino should be seeing her two teammates in the hospital. Instead, she was here worried about her crush. Hinata then felt a small amount of shame run through her. She was just as bad as she couldn't even focus on her own training. Pretty soon people started muttering as they saw Kakashi approaching with Sasuke in his arms without Naruto. "Get him to the hospital," Kakashi said as Anbu approached. They took Sasuke and ran to the hospital. Ino and Sakura quickly ran after the Anbu, hoping to see their crush. Tsunade approached Kakashi, a frightened expression on her face. "Kakashi, where is Naruto?" Tsunade asked. "Where is he, damn it?" Kakashi, harnessing his acting skills, said, "I'm sorry Tsunade-sama, but I didn't reach them in time. Sasuke had driven Naruto through with a Chidori. Naruto was dead when I got to them." The busty cage gained a panicked expression as she said, "No, it can't be." To drive the point home, Kakashi pulled out the scroll with Naruto's body in it. Tsunade took the scroll with trembling hands. She knew these kinds of scrolls all too well. She knew that these were used in times of war to ship the dead back home, to prevent secrets from being found, or for the dead being desecrated. The blonde closed her eyes as tears began to form. Tsunade found herself clencing her fist as she remembered the deaths of Dan and Nawaki, both killed by the curse of her necklace. At that moment she turned and left, heading for the cage tower in the middle of the village. Shizune quickly ran after her teacher, hoping to comfort her. Hinata was taking it as badly as Swand. She proceeded to go home so no one would have to see her cry. The other villagers began acting more jovial when they learned that Sasuke had killed Naruto. Finally, the demon they had all despised was dead. They no longer had to fear the retribution of the Kyuubi. They all began to vocalize their joy. Gaara and his siblings felt disgust and sorrow build up. Sorrow for the loss of the boy who had helped to make their damaged family whole again after their father turned Gaara into a virtually emotionless fighting machine. Anger at the villagers for their disregard for the death of someone over something that they had no control over. Beyond that was disgust towards these people for celebrating the return of a traitor. Had it been their village, Sasuke would have dragged Sasuke back in chains and then had him tried for what he did. However, it seemed that they didn't seem to care. The trio of Sand Ninja began to leave, heading back home. They would make sure that the Wind Daimyo would know of how their so-called ally treated their own. Meanwhile on Mount Myaboku. "What do you mean the prophecy has changed?" The shout came from Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, echoed throughout the chamber Gamamaru was in. "Yes," the great Toad Sage said, "the prophecy has changed. It doesn't refer to a child anymore. Now it refers the spawn of a dragon who will bring peace or destruction of the world. It says that with the power of the heavens and with golden fire, he will eviscerate all evil with the help of the 9 keys. Jiraiya looked confused at this. What the hell did this prophecy mean? Why do prophecies always have to be so damn cryptic? He didn't know what the heavens meant. Could it mean the Sage of 6 Paths or something else? The gold fire was probably a bloodline or some ability he had. As for the 9 keys, he immediately thought about the tailed beasts. He idly wondered what this would mean for Naruto. Jiraiya. The white-haired super pervert turned to see a toad that far eclipsed his own size, but not as big as Gamamaru. The toad was orange with blue markings. Bandages were wrapped around his body and left foreleg. He had a necklace with 7 large beads on with the central and largest one had the kanji for loyalty on it. It was Gamma, the holder of the toad summoning contract. What is it, Gamma? What's got your armor in a wad? Jiraiya asked, confused. Instead of answering, the toad took out the summoning scroll. He laid it down and opened it. Jiraiya looked down at the open scrolls. He was curious, and when he caught sight of Naruto's name. The name that was normally written in red blood had turned black, signifying Naruto's death. Oh no, Jiraiya said, I have to go. Gamamaru, tell Ma and Pa Toad I say hi. But that Jiraiya vanished in a plume of smoke. Moments later in Konoha. Jiraiya appeared in a large blast of smoke. He was treated to the sight of Tsunade chugging down a huge bottle of sake. Well, this did result in his favorite parts of her moving in a nice fashion. He also knew that Tsunade only drank like this when she was grieving, as he saw her do it when Dan and Nawaki died. Tsunade, Jiraiya said, getting the woman's attention, is it true? Is Naruto really gone? Tears spilled down the woman's face, and that was the only answer that the old pervert needed. Jiraiya swept her up in a hug and held her tight, hoping to comfort his oldest friend. Why? She asked, why does that damn thing keep taking everybody away from me? Tsunade sobbed as he continued to hug Jiraiya. She was also trying to keep aware of where his hands were. Luckily, they stayed on her back. It's okay, Haim, Jiraiya whispered, let it out. Let it all out. She did. All the pain she had bottled up over her brother, Nawaki, her lover, Dan, and now her godson, Naruto. Tsunade sobbed into her fellow Sanin's shoulder. This is all my fault, Tsunade sobbed, I shouldn't have left. I was so upset over Kushina, I didn't even think of coming back. Jiraiya said, it's my fault too. I should have checked on Naruto when I came to give Sarutobi-sensei my updates. I should have been a better godfather. Now I know when I die, Kushina, Minato, and probably Naruto are going to kick my ass into reincarnation. The spider-upset-natured Tsunade couldn't help but chuckle. The image of the 3 family members beating the living tar of the old pervert brought her spirits up some. The pair backed off from each other. There was a brief silence. I'm leaving. Jiraiya turned to Tsunade with a shocked expression. What? The busty blonde sighed and said, I'm leaving. I don't have anything tying me to this village anymore. I'll just use my Sanin travel rights, and there's nothing those old farts or that old freak Danzo can do to stop me from leaving. Jiraiya said, I take it that there is more to this than just Naruto dying. She turned to the window and said, ever since the news of Naruto's death these idiots have been celebrating. This is not the village that my grandfather founded. I can just see him and my grand-uncle rolling over in their graves so much that they wear through the wood in their coffins. Jiraiya nodded and said, good luck with that, Tsunade. You know how the council will feel about a skilled shinobi like yourself leaving. Tsunade scoffed and said, I'd like to see them try. Like I said, they can't do anything thanks to my rights. Meanwhile in Konoha's hospital, the Konoha 12 minus Sakura, Ino, and Sasuke were gathered in Choji's hospital room. Naruto's dead? Choji asked from his hospital bed. The overweight ninja was hooked up to a heart monitor and a couple of IVs. He tried to move, but his muscles screamed in agony due to the red soldier pill he ate. It's hard to believe, Kiba said, wearing bandages on his body as well as his arm in a sling. He may have been a baka, but hell if he was a tough baka. To be honest, I always had a feeling that Naruto would outlive us. The guy was so too stubborn to die. Kiba had been forced to acknowledge Naruto's growth into a shinobi after the way he defeated him and Neji. His thoughts shifted to Akamaru, who was currently at his family's veterinary clinic. Neji just sat off to the side, thick bandages wrapped around his shoulder where an arrow had pierced his shoulder and stitches on his back where several kunai had pierced his back. His uninjured arm was clenched as he tried to keep himself from getting too angry. Troublesome, Shikamaru muttered as he glanced down at his broken finger, the only injury he sustained during this mission. The others all seemed upset. They may not have held Naruto in high regard, but they couldn't deny that it was upsetting. Lee felt tears run down his face as he felt anger run through his body. The most youthful Naruto had fallen in battle bringing back the traitor. He swore that he would live on in his friend's name, in the name of the boy who helped save his ninja career. Suddenly, the door opened and a member of Anbu wearing a wolf mask entered the room. He looked at the members of the room and said, for those who are not part of the Uchiha retrieval mission, please leave. We need to talk to the members of the team. In another room. Sakura and Ino sat while Sasuke laid in a bed, waiting for him to wake up. Sasuke had immediately been rushed to a hospital room to examine his wounds. Thankfully, to the fangirls anyway, he only had a few broken bones, minor lacerations, and was suffering from some minor chakra exhaustion. Well, it seemed that the room was vacant other than the Ino said, Naruto really did a number on him. Sakura scoffed and said, Naruto just got lucky. There's no way the dead last of our class could have beaten Sasuke. Ino nodded and said, yeah, you're right. I'm going to get something to drink. You want something? Sakura answered, water, please. The Yamanaka heiress walked out the room, closing the door behind her. There was a moment of silence. You are so pathetic, a voice rang in Sakura's head. Sakura sighed and thought, I thought I got rid of you. What do you want? Inner Sakura, a second personality that Sakura had, called Is for short, said, why are you even doing this? You're sitting beside the guy who tried to betray your village after your other teammate died, are you really that shallow? Sakura thought back, I don't have to take this from you. Is responded, well, you got me sister, too bad, so sad. Honestly, I thought that the whole mission to Wave Country would have been enough to knock you off your high horse, but apparently, you're too cocky to think that you can't be taken down. Sakura retorted, oh please. I was the Kunoichi of the year and Sasuke was the rookie of the year. We are meant to be. He almost kissed me that one time, and we probably would be dating now if Naruto hadn't kept getting the way by constantly asking me out. Is answered, yeah, and the fact that Sasuke seemed to be acting a little out of the ordinary completely slipped your notice, Ms. Kunoichi of the year. And we both know that you only got that title because of your book smarts, which has gotten you nothing. Sakura was about to argue with her, but Is cut her off. And before you start going on about what you've done, let's recap. During the bell test, all you did was run through the forest and fainted when you saw an illusion and when you saw Sasuke buried up to his neck in the dirt. During the wave mission, you just stood by and guarded the bridge builder. If it were for Kakashi, Sasuke, and Naruto, you probably would have been cut in half by Zabuza and his helper. Sakura tried again, but Is refused to let her get a word in. In the forest of death, you had to be saved by Rock Lee, Ino, Choji, and Shikamaru. True, you stepped up, but you still had to be saved. You didn't make it to the finals while Naruto and Sasuke did. Then when Gaara attacked you just wound up playing innocent bystander. Now that you think that you've had training from Tsunade that you're actually better. Sakura growled out, forgetting to speak mentally, I am better. Is laughed and said, really, because you haven't really done anything except help at the last second, get saved and pretty much nothing else. Just face it Pinky, you're the dead weight of the team, not Naruto. As for Sasuke, he hasn't even given you so much as a glance, or any girl for that matter. Wake the hell up. But that is went quiet. Sakura growled in anger as he glanced at Sasuke's still sleeping form. She growled as she pushed down her doubts and anger as she focused on the task at hand. At that moment, Ino walked back in with the water, which Sakura took with a small thanks and drank. It will all work out, Sakura thought, looking at Sasuke with an icy pit forming in her stomach, despite her willing it away, everything will all work out. Meanwhile in the Hyuga complex. Since she arrived home, Hinata had been crying in her room on her own. She heard several branch members trying to coax her out of her room, but she told them to leave, in her usual polite manner, and just wanted to be left alone. Hinata sobbed into her pillow. The boy who could inspire her was gone. The boy she had crushed on for years was gone. She looked back and cursed herself for her weakness. She always watched from afar and never really approached him, her nerves always getting the best of her. Hinata got up from her bed and walked over to the mirror. She saw herself. She saw the sorrow-filled eyes. Her tear-stained cheeks flushed from the amount of time she had spent crying. She glanced at the nearby mirror which sat on a dresser. Near it was a picture of her as a toddler, smiling happily, next to her mother, holding the recently born Hanabi, and her father, with a true smile on his face, as opposed to the constant serious scowl he usually wore. Acha and Hinata thought, why did you have to go? Father and Hanabi both treat me so coldly. And now this. Is everything I know going to be taken from me? Hinata's eyes became strong as she thought, no, I won't fall into despair. For Naruto-kun I will become stronger, for him and for you. I've already started working on my own version of the gentle fist. Maybe I can talk to Guy-sensei and Lee about it. Given that they've trained Niji, they might be able to help me. The look of determination that almost rivaled Naruto's filled the child's wide eyes as she left the room to find the two members of Team 9. If she was looking at the image of her mother on the picture, she probably would have seen her mother's smile grow slightly. Meanwhile in a megacar. Several figures stood around a large statue. There were 8 of them, all of them wearing black cloaks that had red clouds on them. The first was a male with onyx eyes that had long, pronounced tear troughs. His hair was jet black and was pulled in a low ponytail, and his face was framed with center-parted bangs that extended to his chin. The cloak he wore had a high collar. Under the cloak he wore mesh armor with navy accents under an identical t-shirt, with a simple white belt around the waist and dark blue pants. On his right ring finger was a red ring with the kanji symbol for vermilion on it. Around his neck was a necklace that had 3 silver rings with red gems in them. On his hands you could see black nail polish, as well as black nail polish on his toes. On his forehead was a Konoha headband with a slash mark through the symbol. This was Itachi Uchiha's rank missing nin from Konohagakure and slayer of the Uchiha clan. The man next to him was by far the tallest, and he looked kind of strange. His skin was pale blue-gray with small round, wide eyes, gill-like facial marking under his eyes, giving him a shark-like appearance. If you could see under his attire you'd see actual gills on his shoulders. His teeth were sharp and triangular. His hair was dark blue and spiked up in the shape of a shark fin. On his fingers and toes were dark purple nail polish. There also a sash going around his body holding what looked like a club covered in bandages with a long light yellow handle with a small skull adorning the bottom of it. On his left ring finger was a yellow ring with the kanji for south. On his forehead was a Kurigakur headband with a slash through the symbol. This was Kisame Hoshigaki, a former member of Kurigakur's 7 Swordsmen and Monster of the Hidden Mist. Next to him was a medium-length silver hair that was slicked back and distinct purple eyes. He wore the black cloak with red clouds like the others. Under the cloak he wore pants and sandals. Around his neck was the headband symbol of Yugakur with a slash mark through it. He also had an amulet that had a symbol that looked like an inverted triangle in a circle. On his back was a large triple-bladed scythe with red blades that got smaller from top to bottom, a red shaft with bandages wrapped around the bottom of the long handle, a black cable that connected to the man's arm, going up his cloak sleeve. On his fingers and toes were dark green nail polish, and on his left index finger was an orange ring that had the kanji for 3 in it. This was Haiden the Jashin priest. Next to him was the second tallest of the was tan-skinned, and he looked like a man in his prime given his muscular build. He wore a white hood and a black mask leaving his green pupils and red sclera eyes, wore the black and red cloak and a headband for Takigakur on his forehead with a slash through the symbol. On his fingers and toes he wore dark brown nail polish and on his left middle finger was a dark green ring with a kanji symbol for north in it. This was Kakuzu. Next to him was a rather feminine-looking man if his long blonde hair was anything to go by. He had slanted blue eyes, and his long blonde hair was in a half ponytail with the rest hanging down freely, with a bang hanging over his left eye. If you could see under that bang you'd see a scope. If you could see the palms of his hands you would see mouths on them. He wore the normal cloak. Under that cloak he wore a belt that had various bags of clay. He wore black nail polish on his fingers and toes, and on his right index finger was a teal ring that had the kanji for blue or green in it. This was Dodara, the Mad Bomber. The next figure was by far the shortest of them. He was hunched over with pale skin and a black mask. He wore a straw hat on his head with strips of white cloth covering his face. Unlike the others he didn't wear nail polish or ring. This was Sasori of the Red Sand. Next was the only woman of the group. She stood relatively tall with blue hair, amber-colored eyes with lavender eyeshadow, and elaborate piercing. In her hair she had a light blue paper flower and a neutral expression on her face. She wore the black cloak like the others and orange nail polish, plus the ring on her right middle finger with the kanji for white on it. This was Conan. Next to her was by far the strangest of the bunch. One half of him was completely black with a gold eye, while the other half was white with light green hair and a golden eye. Around his head was a large plant-like mouth like a Venus flytrap. This was Zetsu species unknown. The final member seemed to be their leader. He was of a respectable height. He had multiple piercings in his ears, nose, and lower lips. He wore the traditional cloak, a strange necklace around his neck, and on his right thumb was a purplish-gray ring with a kanji for 0 in it. He also had a necklace around his neck. What stuck out about him was his hair and eyes. His hair was orange and spiky. His eyes were purple with a black dot pupil and a ring pattern around it. This was Pain. Together they were Akatsuki, an organization of missing nin. So the 9 tails Jinchuriki is dead, Pain said, his emotionless face. Isom let out an annoyed huff and said, damn, I hoping to get that kid. I wanted to go up against Konoha's odd beast. Itachi just let out a huff. Looks like that little brother of yours is more of Pain than we thought, Itachi, ye, Dodara said. Itachi just gave the Mad Bomber his usual poker face. Dodara was about to say something else when he was suddenly slapped over the head. A large metal scorpion tail slid back under Sasori's cloak faster than most could perceive, but they still saw it. Enough, Pain said. Though his voice didn't hold anger, the power behind it caused everything to stop. It seems our plans are at an end, Pain said. Leader Sama, that might not be the case, Zetsu said, speaking in 2 tones, as he stepped forward. The leader of Akatsuki turned towards the plant man. We all know the Bijuu cannot be killed. We just need to wait until the 9 tails reforms in a couple of years, the humanoid plant explained. Isom groaned and said, do we really need to wait 9 more years? This is crap. A small wave of killing intent from Pain shut the man up. Pain's purple and black ringed eyes held a small amount of annoyance and said, fine. Our plan will continue, but delayed. All members of Akatsuki then proceeded to vanish, revealing them to be nothing but holograms. Everyone except for Conan and Pain. After a brief silence the amber-eyed woman said, this was an unexpected happening. Pain turned to her and said, plans have delays or unexpected issues, Conan. Even God has plans that lasted for centuries before they were complete. Pain then proceeded to walk into the darkness. Conan quickly followed. Meanwhile with Naruto. Kushina and Minato had fallen over laughing loudly. "You mean," Kushina said as she gasped for air, "you painted the Hokage monument in a kill me orange jumpsuit and nobody noticed?" Naruto smiled at this and laughed, "Yep. The only person who caught me was Iruka-sensei. I still don't know how he did that." The two then fell over laughing again. "Oh man, I would have loved to see that," Minato chuckled, tears running down his face. Off to the side, the Akatsuki clan members were laughing maniacally. They had to admit it was hilarious. Ami, Tozi, and Shinigami all chuckled as they remembered the incident, being all-knowing had its advantages sometimes. It had been about an hour since Naruto arrived. Since then they had arrived at the place where they were staying. It was a rather nicely sized manor. There were a few rooms upstairs with enough room for the Namikaze family and the Akatsuki family. In the back there was a huge training area, no doubt where Naruto would be spending his time training. Since then Minato and Kushina were both bonding with their son. It was quite clear that Naruto still held some resentment to Minato, but they could work on that later. They had asked Naruto about what his adventures as a ninja. From the wave mission to the Chunin exams, the two parents couldn't help but feel pride at how their son had managed to help so many people. They were annoyed however, when they learned about some of the other ninja of Konoha. Minato was even more disappointed in Kakashi. The young boy apparently had let that damn Sharingan eye of his go to his head, given the over 1,000 jutsu thing. Minato shook his head as this was not the boy who he trained. The amount of favoritism shown was disgusting. Hell, it was the very same treatment that led to Orochimaru. Kushina was thinking more along the lines of beating the tar out of the silver-haired hypocrite. Another thing that got them was how much the academy had degraded. They were popping arrogant pains left and right. One image was the idea of Kiba and Yuzuka. The boy's brash attitude and almost near inability to hold his tongue would lead to troubles for his team if it wasn't taken down. Hopefully Naruto's embarrassing defeat of him brought down his ego some. They were also appalled at the fangirls being produced in the form of Ino and Sakura. Two girls who dieted and didn't take any of their training serious unless it involved their crush. It made them wonder how they had survived so long. They also regaled Naruto with tales of their youth. Telling him about their times in the academy and what they had done when they were his age, as well as a few war stories from the ninja wars. Naruto learned he got his verbal tick from his mother and, apparently, go this dad's taste in women. That being women with unique features. This made a lot of sense given his crush on Sakura. The partying mood went down after a while and Naruto decided it was a good time to move on to a serious subject. "So," Naruto said, "I've been going through this but can't figure it out. How exactly am I supposed to bring peace to the world?" The feeling around the table became serious. "First of all," Hagoromo said, "we need to approach the major issues. First, you are going to have to take the remaining Biju from the elemental nations. The Biju have been abused throughout history because of their power, and I will not see that happen again. The second will be the destruction of the Leaf Village, and finally the destruction of the Akatsuki." Naruto blinked and said, "So the Akatsuki have to go huh? What about Itachi?" Indra answered, "Don't worry Naruto, Itachi will be saved. As for uniting the ninja world I have a feeling someone may cause it unintentionally." Kushina then said, "Now, it's starting to get really late. We should get to sleep. We start training early in the morning." Everyone nodded and got up and went to bed. Naruto had changed into some pajamas and was prepared to sleep. For the first time in his life, Naruto felt like he didn't have to sleep with one eye open. The following morning. Naruto struggled to stay asleep as light flowed in from the windows. He groaned a bit as he tried to stay asleep. It was the first time in his life that he was able to sleep peacefully and damn if he wasn't going to enjoy it. Naruto rolled over in his sleep and snugged deeper into his pillows and almost went back to sleep. I say almost because a hand pushed his shoulder. "Naruto," Kushina said as he pushed her son slightly, "time to wake up." Naruto simply grumbled and pushed himself deeper into the bed, pulling the covers over his head. Kushina pulled the covers off, starting to get slightly annoyed with her son, refusing to rise from the world of dreams. Kushina then decided it was time to bring out the big guns. She left the room and returned a few moments later with a bucket of cold water in her hands. She drew it back and launched tea contents at the boy. Naruto let out a shrill cry as the ice-cold water struck him, instantly arousing him from his sleep. "What the hell, woman?" Naruto, now cold and soaking. Kushina said, "That's what you get for not waking up when I told you to. Now get dried off and come down for breakfast. We have some things we need to discuss." Naruto sighed and nodded. Naruto got up and changed out of his wet clothes. After a large breakfast that was made up of bacon, eggs, waffles, apples, milk, and orange juice, Naruto was given his schedule for the training he would receive. 7 o'clock to 7:30 breakfast. 7:30 to 8 o'clock morning workout. 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock chakra control exercises. 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock to jutsu training. 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock ninjutsu training. 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock lunch. 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock ninjutsu training. 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock fuinjutsu practice. 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock dinner. 5 o'clock to 10 o'clock relaxation. 10 o'clock bedtime. After looking over his schedule, Naruto felt a little nervous. That was a very long schedule, but knowing what his mission is supposed to be, he knew it was going to be a very long few years. He sighed to himself as he finished his breakfast. 7:30 to 8 o'clock morning workout. Naruto now stood in front of his mother. She crossed her arms as she looked across from the boy. "Okay, Naruto," the redhead said, "we are going to work on your body. This will work you up enough for the rest of the training for the day." Naruto nodded in understanding. "Now," Kushina said, "drop and give me 50 push-ups, 50 crunches, 50 squats, and then run 5 laps around this training area." Naruto didn't move as he just stared at his mother with a shocked expression. Kushina narrowed her eyes and yelled, "Did his stutter? Move." Her eyes flashed red and her hair raged like an octopus's tentacles. Naruto immediately dropped to the ground and started exercising. Shikamaru and Kiba were right. Moms really are scary. 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Kushina stood in front of her now exhausted child. The blonde was now doubled over and breathing very hard. "Don't tell you're tired already," Kushina said, "we've just gotten started." Naruto panted, slightly tired because of the exhaustion of the warm-up that he had gotten. "Now then," the woman continued, "from what you told me you know chakra control up to the water walking exercise, correct?" Naruto nodded. "Well, then we are going to improving on your normal chakra control," Kushina said as she motioned to the trees nearby. "You see these trees? You are going to climb up them via the walking exercise." Naruto frowned and said, "Seriously, mom? I can already do that." Kushina grinned and said, "Yes, but this is going to be different. Each tree is of a different density. One eye rotting and other such different factors. If you ever touch the ground at the end of the training, you will have to do that amount times 10 in push-ups." Naruto grinned and said, "Sounds easy enough." Naruto walked up a tree. He stood there for a moment before jumping to another tree. He held that for a moment before he realized his foot almost broke through the second tree's rotting bark. "Oh, and one more thing, Naruto," Kushina said as she looked up at her son, "dodge." Naruto looked confused for a moment and asked, "Dodge? Dodge?" Kushina then released a barrage of kunai. Naruto let out a cry of terror as he started dodging like crazy, trying to avoid the waves of weapons trying to pierce his skin. In the process of dodging, he didn't apply the right amount of chakra and slipped off the surface of a tree, falling to the ground. Naruto gave his mother a dirty look. "Don't give me that look, young man," she said sternly, causing the blonde to wince. The rest of the first hour continued like this. After an hour, Naruto had to do 100 push-ups from the tree exercise. After the hour, they changed things up, going with a water walking exercise using a pool that formed in the ground. This time Naruto had to walk on water while the water was swirling. Naruto had some trouble with this, but he managed to get it done quickly. Unfortunately, the method didn't work long as the water would speed up and slow down at random intervals and Kushina was still throwing stuff at him. By the time the second hour was over, Naruto was exhausted. Thankfully, Minato was the one who took over his training next. 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock. To jutsu training. Minato stood across from Naruto with his arms crossed. Naruto looked slightly winded as this training was far more intense than what he was used. "Okay," the older blonde said, "Naruto, I want you to attack me. Let's see just what you can do." Naruto nodded and charged. Minato dodged an overextended punch with ease. After a few minutes, Minato managed to get a feel for his son's style. If you could call it that. Naruto was more of a brawler than anything else. He used shadow clones haphazardly, only something an Uzumaki could do, to mob his opponent. While a good strategy, this could be a problem as the clones could get in each other's way if there were too many. Though he found that Naruto could think on his feet when he was duped by Naruto switching with a clone and a windmill shuriken flying at his head. "Okay, Naruto," the older blonde said with a smile, "I know your way of fighting, but it's time for you to learn how to really fight. This brawler style you use isn't going to cut it. So, follow me and do as I do." Naruto and Minato both got into a particular stance and they both started practicing. They went for the full hour before it was time to move on. 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock Jinjutsu training. Naruto now stood in front of Indra. The first user of the Sharingan stood across from Naruto. "Okay, Naruto," the oldest son of Hagoromo said, "what do you know about Jinjutsu?" Naruto answered, "Mostly the basics." Indra raised an eyebrow and his Sharingan flashed for a brief moment. Naruto's eyes became blank and then the blonde fell over unconscious. Indra sighed as he walked over to the prone boy and smacked him over the head. What it in the where? Indra sighed and said, this is going to take a while. 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock lunch. Naruto's stomach made a loud grumbling noise as he and the others all sat down around the table. There was a huge lunch filled with various foods, including ramen. After eating and getting a good amount of time digesting, everyone went back to work. 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock ninjutsu training. Ashura stood across from Naruto as he stood up ready for training. So, Naruto, what do you know about jutsu? Naruto thought for a moment and answered that it is the art of molding chakra through hand signs to launch attacks of various size, defend against other jutsu, enhance yourself, and other such effects. Ashura nodded and said, correct. Now what are the major affinities? Naruto gained a confused look. Affinities? Ashura rolled his eyes and mentally cursed the idiots in the academy before he said, Naruto, chakra affinities are the element a person's chakra is aligned to. This means they are more likely to use that kind of jutsu. Naruto thought for a minute and asked, so a person like Zabuza would have a water affinity, while someone like Sasuke would have fire and lightning. Ashura nodded and said, correct. Naruto then asked, so the main affinities would be fire, water, earth, wind, and lightning, right? Ashura nodded and said, yes, but there are 2 more affinities than just those. Naruto blinked and started asked, what? There are? Ashura nodded and said, there are. The other 2 main affinities are yin, which can be used to create anything from nothing, and yang, which can be used to give life. There are also sub-affinities which are normally seen as bloodlines that are 2 or more chakra natures mixed into one. An example being the first Hokage's wood release, which was a mix of earth and water chakra. Naruto listened in awe and then stopped for a moment when he realized something. Wait, I met someone a while back named Haku who could use ice techniques. Can that be made from mixing chakra affinities? Ashura nodded and said, yes, ice can be made by mixing water and wind chakra. Naruto blinked in surprise and said, so that means that all the elements can be mixed together. That's a lot of jutsu combinations. The founder of the Senju clan smiled and said, yes, there are. Now on to training Naruto, I want you to perform the fireball jutsu. Naruto blinked in confusion and asked, what, why? Ashura said, don't question your instructor. Naruto stepped away from his teacher and started to think about what he knew on the jutsu. He found it and went through the necessary hand signs. High release. Grand fireball. Instead of a large ball of fire, Naruto only launched a couple of sparks from his mouth. Ah, what? I did it right. Ashura stepped forward and said, Naruto, well, you may have some knowledge of the technique, you do not know its mechanics. Think of it like you've copied the jutsu with a Sharingan. Without knowledge of its mechanics you can't use it. Naruto sighed, slightly upset. Some of the jutsu he had seen used in his life were cool. However, the Akatsuki clan members said, you do have an affinity for wind chakra. We shall start with that. For the remaining time, Naruto was trying to learn how to cut a leaf with his chakra. It was difficult as Naruto's control was still shot to hell after only 1 day of training. 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock Fuinjutsu practice. Naruto now sat at a desk with an inkwell, a pen, and a few dozen pieces of paper. Hagoromo and Minato stood behind him. Now, Naruto, Minato started, Fuinjutsu is far more complicated than it sounds. For fully utilize a seal, it must be perfect. If even one mark on the seal is out of place, the seal could fail in a spectacular fashion. Naruto blinked and said, it couldn't be that bad. Hagoromo approached the child and said, Naruto, if I had been faulty in the seal I used to seal away the chakra of the Jaiubi, the power would have torn me apart long before I died, and it would have gone on a rampage. Plus, if the seal on you was done even slightly wrong, you would have wound up like your friend Gaara. Naruto winced as he remembered how Gaara had been before his defeat. But that Naruto started to get to work. Unfortunately, Naruto had difficulty because his handwriting was horrible. Again, damn the academy or just lack of general education. Before Naruto could learn any Fuinjutsu he would have to improve his handwriting until it was legible. 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock dinner. Naruto was exhausted, both physically and mentally by the time dinner came around. After eating his fill, he and his teachers began to discuss any changes that they would make to Naruto's training over time. 5 o'clock to 10 o'clock relaxation. Naruto spent the rest of the day relaxing up until bedtime. The blonde hit the bed falling asleep before he hit the pillow. Chapter 3. 1 year later, the results of training. Naruto versus the celestial symbols. A year flew by as Naruto trained with his family. The training was brutal and long, but the effects were astounding. Naruto's previous brawling style had improved leaps and bounds under his father's tutelage. Instead of brawling, Naruto had learned his father's hummingbird style. He was also starting to learn how to combine with the gentle fist used by the Hyuga. The combination of the two was a brutal style that could shatter bones and tear joints apart. The Akatsuki family also taught him their own fighting style, the Imso no Ken, the element fist. The fighting style was a fast and brutal style with various stances that were based on the 5 elements. Fire was overpowering and aggressive, water involved countering and striking, wind was brutal and fast, lighting was accurate and fast, and earth was mainly for defense. Naruto had managed to learn the first 4 due to his own natural affinities. His chakra control shot through the roof under his mother's bizarre and very effective way of training. Naruto could stand on water for hours while reading and could do the same while tree walking. Naruto was currently learning how to suppress his chakra to make himself seem less visible if he was hiding. This would come in handy if he needed to vanish quickly as well as help him when it came to stealth training. On top of all that, Naruto learned a special skill most ninja didn't have. It turns out Naruto is a sensor type. This allowed Naruto to sense someone by directly sensing their chakra. Naruto's ninjutsu expanded several times over. During his training with Ashura, Naruto learned he had 5 affinities. Wind from his father, water and lightning from his mother, and fire and yang from Kyuubi. Naruto managed to grasp the basics of the elements, but yang chakra was trickier. He couldn't use it in battle because brining things to life didn't have a good use. While he didn't have an earth affinity, they did help him learn some of the low-level earth techniques he had inserted into his brain. Naruto was currently learning techniques from the sub-elements scorch, explosion, lava, boil, radiation, swift, sand, ice, typhoon, storm, light, and wave. He was even learning techniques for the Kekai Toda, bloodline selection, maelstrom and plasma. Despite the use of shadow clones, the training was still difficult as he had to get the chakra proportions of the jutsu right or they would blow up in his face. And we meant that very literally. Naruto's training in Genjutsu was also coming along nicely. Thanks to the enhanced chakra control, Naruto could now cast minor Genjutsu, but still nothing too big because his control wasn't completely perfect. He could also sense Genjutsu before he was caught in it. However, he was still unable to break the Tsukuyomi technique that Indra used. The slowest thing going around was Naruto's Fuinjutsu training. The art of sealing was incredibly complex and gave the blonde headaches sometimes. Shadow cones were proving useless as Naruto's head nearly exploded the first time he used it in his training. The training was coming slowly, but he was improving bit by bit each day. Aside from all of that, the goddesses would sometimes come down to help Naruto train with the gifts that they gave him. Tozi's gift came easiest, being able to speak to all kinds of animals. It was kind of fun to get someone else's point of view and he could see how using normal animals as spies could be useful. However, they tended to give out a little too much information, in other words TMI. Kami and Shinigami's gifts were a bit harder for Naruto to understand, mostly because Naruto had a bad feeling about the whole playing God thing. He had seen plenty of movies and read a few stories where that kind of power always went wrong. He was getting a good grasp of it at least. He could heal and cause all kinds of wounds, though he mostly stuck with lacerations and large bruises. Instant death touch was not something he was fond of. Unknown to the blonde, he would have a chance to test out his newly formed skills sooner than he thought. Meanwhile on Earth in a small village in River Country. So, are we all aware of the plan? A figure asked as he looked over the group of 4 standing around. 4 people, 3 men and 1 woman stood around each other. The one who spoke was a man with a slim face, a prominent jawline, a black line visible around his eyes, and brown swept back hair. On his back he had a white sword strapped to his back. On his forehead was a beige headband with a symbol on it that didn't belong to any of the 5 hidden villages. He wore a purple jacket over a black shirt and ninja pants and sandals. The only woman among the group had pale skin, dark green jaw-length hair with yellow framing her face, and brown eyes that lacked pupils. He had red lipstick on her lips and wore a light gray jacket with a furry tuft around her neck with a light brown sleeveless shirt over a red sleeveless dress. She had a long light gray sleeveless leather glove on her right arm, a long light brown stocking that covered her left arm, with a single pitch black leather glove covering her right hand, and a forehead protector with the same symbol as the man who spoke with a white cloth. On her feet were 2 light gray calf-length high-heel stocking sandals. On the left side of her jacket were 2 swords. Both of which had light blue handles, light blue blades, and gold guards and pommels. The only difference between the 2 was a green gem in the guard of one of the swords. The second male looked a little feminine. He was slender with green eyes that were outlined by blue eyeshadow. His blue hair popped out from his white forehead protector and was neatly combed throughout his head. He had a white scarf around his neck that reached 1 to his pants. He wore a tight purple sleeveless shirt which revealed his abdomen. On his arms were purple arm warmers with brown straps that secured them onto his arms. His pants were baggy, gray, fastened by a brown belt and tucked into his sandals. On his back was a strange sword. It had a white handle with a yellow square-shaped guard. The blade itself was a dark blue color and was tri-pronged like a trident. The 3 blades also seemed to be segmented. The final man was by far the largest of the group. He was broadly built, indicating his strength. He had a purple coat under armor which was designed with a silver tiger-like head breastplate and a pair of dark pauldrons on his shoulders. His eyes had small black pupils and wavy brown hair with a small beard. In his hands he carried a mace with a square-shaped head that had spikes coming out of each side. In order, they were Hoki, Kujaku, Raigan, and Tsuko. They were members of Takumi no Sado, the village of artisans. To be more specific, they were known as the Four Celestial Symbols. The village of artisans had gone unknown, under the notice of the bigger villages. They had long since grown tired of being in the shadow of the 5 great villages, and they had a plan to rise up to the occasion. "We know the plan," Kujaku said, annoyed. "When the Jinchuriki goes out of the village for the training issue, we attack, drain his chakra, and use it to revive Seimei. I don't know why you're so worried. With our weapons we can get this done easy." Tsuko rolled his beady eyes and said, "Don't get full of yourself, Kujaku, just because you were chosen to wield those swords of yours. My armor far exceeds your little knives." Kujaku laughed and said, "Oh really, Tsuko? Shall we test that?" The two were about to go at it when Hoki pulled the sword from his back and swung it down, sending an arc of fire from the blade slashing between the two. Once the flames cleared, the sword was revealed. It resembled a long sword. The blade was pitch black and rectangular shape. Like the blade, the hilt and handle were black as pitch with white bandages wrapped around the handle and a green orb on the end of the blade. "Enough," he yelled, "all 4 of these great weapons will be needed to contain the One-Tails. Now get some sleep, all of you. We'll need to be at our best for our coming mission." Kujaku and Tsuko glared at each other before parting ways. Raigan simply scoffed and started to walk away. Hoki sighed and rubbed his temples. "Just one more day," he muttered, "just one more day before you are revived, Seimei-sama. Just one more day." He smirked as he glanced up at the moon. Soon the village of artisans will be given the respect it deserved. In a place between worlds. Shinigami, Tozi, and Kami both crossed their arms under their busts as they watched the incident through their all-seeing orb. "What is it with humans wanting to bring people back to life?" Shinigami complained. "I mean, enough people die as it is, and I have enough paperwork." Kami answered, "Hey, you think it doesn't affect me? I deal with a person coming to life unnaturally. Do you have any idea how confusing that is to certain departments? Why do you think we got rid of the reincarnation idea?" Tozi said, "I think we have bigger problems, the effects of people getting brought back to life on the departments of life and death." Kami nodded and said, "Yes, again the humans wish to use the Biju for their own purposes. Plus, let's face it, they could become a problem in the future with their weapons, especially if Shukaku's chakra has a lasting effect on them." Shinigami asked, "Do you think Naruto is ready?" Tozi nodded and said, "Let's use this as a test. Our future husband needs to test his skills against people who aren't holding back. Plus, I think if he stays in the training area any longer he'll get some serious cabin fever." The trio of goddesses nodded. They teleported away. A few seconds later, they reappeared in the training hall where Naruto, his family, and teachers were staying. It seems they arrived at a good time as apparently the group had just sat down for lunch. "Hey girls," Naruto said with a smile at the goddesses, "what's shaking?" The trio then explained the situation to the group. "So, they intend to kidnap Gaara and use the power of Shukaku to revive their master?" Kami nodded and said, "Yes, and not only will a dangerous person be brought back to life, but the process will also kill your friend Gaara." Naruto narrowed his eyes in anger. "So, when do I go? Back on Earth?" Tsuko, Raigan, Kujaku, and Hoki all stood just outside of the training area where Gaara, his siblings and the group of young ninja hopefuls were training. Thankfully, for them, the trees kept them hidden, that along with some nice chakra suppression techniques, kept them hidden as well. Hoki noted that Gaara seemed to be getting a little close to one of the students, a brunette girl, who was practicing with a rope dart. Hoki grinned and said, "Okay, it looks like the Jinchuriki is getting close to that girl there. We grab her and then we'll draw the Jinchuriki to us." He nodded at Raigan, who pulled his sword off his back. With a smirk on his face he threw his sword out. The blue weapon shot out for several feet like a whip. The weapon wrapped around the brunette's ankle and dragged her off into the trees. "Gaara." This got the group's attention. Gaara reached out with his sand, but the weapon tied around the girl's leg, sped up dragging her faster. The weapon then slithered up her body and wrapped around her tightly, preventing her escape. Tenkuro, Gaara and Temari launched forward after her. Gaara launched his sand forward to grab her, but Tsuko leapt in the way, charging his mace with as much water chakra he could spare. He smirked and his flail swung at Gaara in an overhead arc. Gaara's sand acted immediately rose up and blocked the massive weapon. The wave of sand cracked under the force, but it didn't break. However, because of the water chakra, the sand became saturated with water. Now clumpy and hard to move, a portion of Gaara's sand was useless. Tsuko smirked at the reaction as he jumped back, just in time to avoid a barrage of kunai launched at him from Kankuro, who glared angrily at the man who attacked his brother. Kankuro sent out his puppet again, but this time it was intercepted by a massive blast of water. The blast launched the three-eyed puppet a tree just to the left of its puppeteer. Before Kankuro could reattach the chakra strings, he had to perform a substitution to avoid getting skewered by dark blue blade. He was glad he did as the tree that was behind him got torn in half. As the blade retracted he found himself staring a rather pleased-looking Ryogan, the captured genin behind him, tired in ropes. Ryogan then turned towards Gaara, who sent out his sand to crush his opponent. The feminine-looking man's blade became segmented and water came gushing out, stopping the sand. Now soaked, the sand became heavy and Gaara found difficulty using it. "Get off my brother." The group turned towards the sound to see Temari with her fan drawn and opened. Wind release. Wind cutter. The blonde swung her battle fan as hard as she could, unleashing a wave of wind towards the effeminate male who just attacked her brother. Immediately, Kujaku appeared with her swords. Wind return. As the woman swung her swords, the wind warped around it, much to the shock of the wind mistress in training. The Bond quickly realized that her own technique was being used against her, closed her fan, and did her best to hold up against the skin-cutting winds as it slammed into her. The eldest of the Subaku siblings was knocked backwards into a tree. Gaara growled as he rose up. Unknown to the four criminals, he had a small amount of sand grinding up the dirt around them to create more sand. When he felt he had enough, the sand erupted from the ground and smashed into Ryogan and Tsuko, knocking them away. The red-haired sacrifice then grabbed the female genin and used his sand to propel them upwards, attempting to get some distance between them and to keep her out of the. Off to the side, Hoki, who had kept a good distance, nodded and knew that this was their chance. He stabbed his sword into the ground. Kujaku and Ryogan did the same thing. Ninja Tools barrier. Reverse fish scales formation. Moments later, a massive wave of water erupted from the ground via the underground waterways. The water formed a dragon that slammed into the Gaara and Mitsuri were soaked to the bone. Worse yet, the force of the water was enough to tear off his gourd. Tsuko jumped up and grabbed the boy and threw a chakra-infused punch. With his sand armor loose and with his sand unable to protect him, the impact knocked the air from his lungs and nearly had enough force to knock him out. He proceeded to do the same to Mitsuri before launching them both towards the hidden Hoki. His grin down at the two before he vanished via Shushin. Temari got up with a groan of pain. "Where are they?" she asked angrily. "What have you done with my brother?" Kankuro got up and pulled out another one of his puppets. "Who are you and what do you want?" he asked with a growl as his puppet was brandished menacingly. Tsuko just chuckled and said, "Who we are and what we want are interesting stories. Too bad you'll be too dead to hear it." The three got ready to finish off the two genin when something unexpected happened. "I don't think so." Turning towards the sound of the new voice. They were also slightly confused as to who this person was. Judging by height he wasn't very old, maybe 14 or so. He stood with his arms crossed over his chest. He wore a black shirt underneath that had a collar that covered his entire neck with a short white jacket. Long black pants covered his legs and he wore white boots on his feet. His face was covered by a pure white mask that covered his face. His hair was bright red and spiked out in multiple directions. On his hands were white gloves with studded knuckles. Behind his mask, Naruto smirked at their shocked expressions. "Okay," Naruto thought, "now I just need to think of something really cool to say." "Afternoon, gentlemen, ladies," he said politely, his voice distorted by his mask as if he wasn't in front of a group of A-rank criminals. There was a moment of silence, save for a gust of wind blowing through the area. "Damn it. Afternoon. Really? That's all I could think of. I'm a pranking genius, I should be able to come up with a more memorable introduction." However, this wasn't what the three criminals were thinking. This guy had just snuck up on them and was just talking to them like he was speaking about the weather. This guy was either very arrogant or he was that sure of his skills. Ryogan drew his sword and said, "Who are you supposed to be?" The masked boy simply answered, "My name isn't really your business, now is it?" Kujaku scoffed and said, "Well, that's too bad. Now we won't have anything to write on your tombstone." She drew her swords back and prepared to swing, only for a sudden gust of wind to shot right in front of her. She turned just in time to dodge Temari's now closed battle fan. The metal weapon struck the ground with enough force to crack it. "Back off, hag," Temari growled, "your fight is with me." Kujaku just smirked and she jumped back and ran off in one direction, Temari following. Ryogan launched his sword at the disguised blonde, only for a puppet to intercept it and knock it off course. The man growled as he turned towards Kankuro, who unleashed another puppet. The man jumped back and charged off into a different part of the forest, with Kankuro in hot pursuit. The disguised Naruto cracked his knuckles and he glared at Tsuko. "If you won't give your name," he said, "I'll tell you mine. I am Tsuko, the White Tiger of the West. At least when you die, they'll know the name of the man who killed you." Naruto said, "Really? Because I think it would be more fitting on your tombstone than a eulogy. Suko sent a blank look towards Naruto before launching forward, swinging his mace. The disguised blonde dodged and threw out a hook punch, aiming for his face. Suko blocked the attack and countered with a punch to the ribs. Naruto blocked the punch, grabbing Suko's arm and pushed, knocking the man slightly off balance. Naruto then threw out a chakra-infused punch, striking the armored ninja right in the chest. To Naruto's shock, the impact didn't knock him back. Instead, his fist stopped against the armor. Naruto quickly felt like his chakra was being drained and leapt back. Suko smirked and immediately blurred through hand signs. Water release. Surging fangs. Suko fired a blast of water from his mouth which, surprisingly, took the form of a large tiger. Naruto quickly performed a substitution. The tiger tore through the log like it was made of paper as water splashed around, moistening the nearby dirt into mud. Suko growled as he realized that he didn't know where his masked adversary went. Off to the side, Naruto was hiding behind a tree, suppressing his chakra to avoid being detected. He glanced out from behind the tree. He saw Suko looking around for him. What the hell was that? I felt like my chakra was being drained when I punched him. I'm not familiar with that tiger jutsu either. It must be something they made themselves. This must have been what Sasuke dealt with when he fought that guy back in the Chunin exams. How does he do that? The only physical contact we had was from when I punched him. Naruto then leapt up from the tree branch and unleashed a barrage of kunai and shuriken. Each one was lined with wind chakra, increasing their cutting power and the blade length. Suko seemed to realize this. He went through hand signs as fast as possible. Water release. Water wall. The wall of water didn't stop. The wind chakra enhanced projectiles didn't stop when they hit the water, but they did slow down enough for Suko to react. Focusing chakra through his weapon, he spun the weapon like a propeller in front of him. The dense chakra-enhanced metal managed to deflect the projectiles but left a few nicks in the staff. A mere second after the last one was deflected, Naruto shot forward through the wall of water with his fist drawn back. He sent his fist crashing into Suko's jaw, knocking him backwards. The man was sent flying back, rolling across the ground and kicking up dirt and splashing through some mud, as well as losing his grip on his weapon. Suko stopped only when he crashed into a tree, the impact rattling his brain, sending pain shooting up his spine and knocking the air from his lungs. Before the man could even realize what was happening, Naruto appeared in front of him, unleashing a barrage of short-range, fast-paced punches. The barrage kept him stunned and added damage, as well as causing damage to the tree behind him, the bark being chipped away at. Each one struck at his unarmored stomach and a few to the chest, shoulders, and his face. Naruto noticed that he felt small amounts of his chakra drain with each punch, but only when he punched the armored chest. So, the armor does drain chakra, but I have to come into physical contact with the armor. Good to know. Everything else is fair game. Naruto was ripped from his thoughts as Suko disappeared in a puff of smoke, replaced by his mace. Naruto's final punch tore a chunk out of the innocent tree that was behind the armored man. Naruto ducked to avoid a wild haymaker aimed at his head. Suko's punch tore a huge chunk out of the tree, causing it to fall to the ground. Naruto leapt away as Suko grabbed his mace which shifted into a flail form. With a battle cry, Suko swung the weapon. The chained weight came within inches from caving in Naruto's nose. The masked blonde slid back and dodged another swing before performing a roundhouse that Tsukio managed to block, but he winced under the force of the blow. Suko smirked as he grabbed Naruto's leg, which made the blonde smirk under his mask. The blonde then flipped up and then swung his legs up, using his chakra to enhance his strength, throwing the man into the air. The blonde then slammed Suko on the ground with enough force to make him bounce. He then grabbed Suko's mace flail and, using his fire affinity, and reduced it to bits of melted metal. Suko got up with a groan of pain. He glanced and saw that his weapon was melted. He growled and turned towards the masked adversary who was interfering in their plans. As that happened, a massive explosion went off a few feet away. A massive wave of wind shoots up into the air, no doubt from the fight going on between Kujaku and Temari. Another sound rang out as several trees were knocked over. Sounds like they're having a better time than me, Suko thought as he stood up slowly. I can't waste any more time, Naruto thought, I have to end this now. Naruto turned to his opponent and said, listen, Tiger Man, you don't have your weapon and I've figured out your armor absorbs chakra when someone comes into physical contact with it. You can't beat me, just give up. Suko groaned as he stood up. Suddenly, he grinned. Yeah, you figured out my armor and its flaw, but you don't know what I can do with the chakra once I have it. Naruto raised an eyebrow behind his mask. Then he felt it. A massive amount of chakra build up. A bright green glow came from the head decorating his armor and glowing brightly. This is the true power of my infinite armor. Suko said as the glow got brighter, now die. Tiger scream. A large blast of pure chakra fired out of Tsuko's chest, pushing him back a bit as it raced towards Naruto. The bright light blinded the man and prevented him from seeing his target be destroyed. When the blast faded, Tsuko fell to one knee. He let out a breath of relief as he stared at the resulting destruction of his ultimate attack. Several trees had been reduced to splinters, others had massive burns on them. He let out a tired sigh and slowly started to rise. He stumbled slightly. The tiger scream took a lot of chakra to perform. Usually, most people would attack him over and over without realizing their chakra was being drained, sometimes confusing it with natural use of chakra in battle. However, this guy figured it out quickly, which made him dangerous. It was because of that Tsuko resorted to the tiger scream, a powerful chakra projectile that used the chakra stolen from the victim. However, he could use his own chakra to power it if necessary, but as stated earlier, it took a lot of chakra to perform. The man reached into his secret pouch in one of the leather straps and pulled out a few chakra pills and downed them. Feeling his strength return, he stood up a bit straighter. One down, two more to go. He turned to head off in the direction Kujaku had gone in when suddenly, the ground behind him exploded outwards like someone had thrown a paper bomb. He spun towards the sound and froze when he saw Naruto high in the air. Tsuko was confused until he glanced and saw that there was a hole in the ground, starting where all the brought on by his earlier technique. He had dug underground to get away. He growled angrily as he began to focus chakra in his chest for another tiger scream. With his target in the air, he couldn't miss. Naruto, however, wasn't going to give him that chance. With a puff of smoke, Naruto performed a substitution with a shuriken that was discarded right in front of Tsuko. The symbol man gasped in horror as he saw a ball of chakra forming in Naruto's hand, releasing a small screaming noise as he drew it back. Wind release. Rasengan. The wind chakra-enhanced spiraling sphere slammed into Tsuko's armor, right into the tiger's mouth. The buildup of chakra was suddenly force-fed a huge load of chakra, and with the amount of chakra Naruto was putting into the Rasengan, it became unstable and exploded. The blast engulfed them both. When the smoke cleared, it showed Tsuko had been launched a good couple of feet away. His armor shattered beyond use, and his chest had a nasty-looking grind mark from where the Rasengan had managed to get to him, though it wasn't as bad a regular wind-infused Rasengan. Naruto himself was relatively unharmed, but his arm had taken some of the blast, but the wounds and burns from it were healing already. Tsuko laid on the ground in phenomenal pain and feeling the life drain from him. How? He asked, as a bit of blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. Naruto simply scoffed and said, "That armor of yours is formidable. However, it is not perfect. You might be able to absorb chakra, but you thought that I wouldn't catch on to what you were doing. As for your ultimate technique, that kind of chakra buildup can be unstable, which is why my technique was able to overload it and destroy your armor." Tsuko felt his life fading as he heard the boy's words. Did his armor truly have such a glaring weakness? That wasn't right. He then took a shaky breath, wondering how he had been bested by a masked nobody. It took a moment for Naruto to realize that Tsuko was dead. The blonde felt surprised, a small wave of guilt and disgust ran over him. The blonde gulped as he felt a small amount of bile begin to rise in his throat. After a moment, he managed to swallow the gunk building up and returned to his work. He approached the dead man and prepared to take his armor. However, before he could, it disappeared in a puff of smoke. "Damn it," Naruto said out loud, a reverse summoning. "At least with the armor busted, it should be useless to whoever has it." Naruto then closed his eyes, unseen behind his mask, before he unleashed a small chakra pulse to sense where everyone was. He could feel the fight between Kujaku and Temari, judging by how low her chakra was. She was running out and was not going to last much longer. Kankuro seemed to be faring a bit better than his sister, so Naruto decided it would be best to go to Temari first. With that in mind, he shot off towards them. But Temari panted hard as she held up her battle fan. Her clothes and skin were covered in multiple cuts. None of them were too deep, but they were painful. Around them, trees had been uprooted by powerful winds or cut into pieces. This fight was proving to be much more difficult than the young wind user had originally thought it would be. The woman, who introduced herself as Kujaku, the vermilion bird of the south, turned out to be incredibly skilled with her swords to the point that she could keep Temari on the edge. If that wasn't bad enough, her swords, called the Fujaku Hishimshinken, weaknessless soaring short swords, as she called them, could redirect the wind jutsu she used. So far, none of her techniques had worked so far. Kujaku laughed mockingly at Temari, clearly gloating over the fact that she didn't have a scratch on her, as opposed to Temari's injured form. "It's been entertaining fighting you," she said with a smile, "but I've been fooling around long enough. I think it's time that I just killed you." With that, she drew her swords back and laced them with chakra and swung her swords. Tempest wind. An enormous gust of wind went flying from the swords and went flying towards the young Chunin hopeful. Before the technique could hit, Naruto leaped out from the tree line, burning through hand signs. Earth release. great stone corner. The boy landed in front of Tamari and slammed his hands down on the ground. A stone slab that looked like the corner on a building erupted from the ground. The gust was split in half by the corner, protecting the two. The gust was still powerful enough to make a few of the surrounding trees bend with their force. She looked up and was surprised to see that the masked man from earlier. "I take it you took down one of their own," she said, letting a small amount of relief fill her, but remaining slightly "Yeah," Naruto answered, "the one with the armor. What can you tell me about little Miss Windy?" Tamari looked at him and answered, "Those swords of hers can freely manipulate wind, apparently with little chakra. She's even redirected my own techniques back at me." Naruto contemplated this and thought, okay, that means lightning jutsu is clearly out. Any water and fire techniques would be launched back at us more powerful than ever. On top of that, I don't know any very effective offensive earth techniques. Come on, think. Suddenly, one of the swords slashed through the stone slab with ease. The two blondes launched away from one another while avoiding another barrage of slashes from the sword-wielding Kunoichi. The woman smirked and said, "HMPH, so you beat Tsuko, right? That brain-dead fool. It looks like I'll have to make up for his failure. While his armor may have been the ultimate defense, I wield the ultimate offense." She launched forward swinging her weapons. The blades laced with wind chakra. The swords were extended with wind chakra, making the reach much farther. Naruto knew this as he realized the slash had left an impressive sized nick in his mask. The secret blonde grabbed the woman's forearm to stop her from swinging. She tried to stab him with her other sword, only for Naruto to grab that one too. He then threw out his leg, his knee impacting her stomach, knocking the air from her lungs. A second knee slam knocked her way and a roundhouse sent her stumbling towards Tamari. The pigtailed woman saw her chance and swung her closed fan, slamming it right into the woman's head. The impact knocked her backwards. Unfortunately, Kujaku recovered quickly and prepared a technique. Wind release. Phoenix breath. She swung her weapons, launching a projectile of wind chakra that resembled a bird. Tamari jumped on her fan and leapt upwards avoiding the attack, which fell several trees. Tamari still in midair was a prime target as Kujaku drew her swords back to finish the girl, but in her haste to win, she had made a rookie mistake and completely forgot about her other opponent. "Pay attention, will you?" Naruto said as he charged forward and hitting Kujaku in the throat with a light jab. Kujaku stumbled back, dropping her swords and clutching her throat. Naruto wasn't done as he shot forward with his pointer fingers extended and filed with lighting chakra. Lightning release. Paralyzing touch. Naruto then proceeded to unleash a volley of high-speed pokes. While this would seem like a joke to some, the pokes came with enough electricity to rival a stun gun. The electric charge numbed her body and strikes to her arms rendered them inoperable. Naruto then turned towards the sky and yelled, "Finish it." Tamari jumped off her fan, biting her thumb and running some over the fan before swinging her weapon, calling out the ending move. Summoning technique. Quick beheading dance. In a puff of smoke, a giant white weasel wearing a black and red trimmed vest with a dark green eye patch going over one eye, holding a giant scythe with smaller sickles surrounding him as well a Chinese lantern with a symbol for scythe written on it. The weasel then moved faster than the eye could track, slashing increasingly faster and faster with each passing second. Trees that weren't slashed down were cut down, and pieces of the earth and down trees were slashed to pieces. Kujaku got the worst of it as she was right in the middle of the whirlwind. She was knocked upwards, her skin being cut up like paper. He screams of fear and pain drowned out by the fierce winds. As a particularly nasty slash mark appeared, she stopped screaming. The woman was suspended in the air for a few more moments before falling. The woman fell into the nearby river and was washed away. Tamari smirked as the weasel she summoned vanished in a puff of smoke. Naruto turned towards her and offered her a soldier pill. The blonde woman looked at the masked man with a look of suspicion, but after a moment she took the pill and put it in her mouth. After a moment, she swallowed, not tasting anything bitter, which would indicate poison. Naruto glanced at the two swords on the ground as Tamari recharged and saw them vanish in a puff of smoke, just like with the remains of Tsuko's armor. Given that there weren't any pieces of metal around, it looks like she didn't get the big guy's armor, Naruto thought, which means either the blue-haired guy has it or the big boss, with my luck, the big boss. "Who are you?" Naruto turned to see Tamari looking at him with suspicion. "I said who are you?" She repeated, "What are you doing here and why are you so interested in my brother?" Naruto asked, "Is that any way to treat the person who just saved your life? Seems kind of ungrateful." Tamari said, "I'm not saying I'm not grateful, but don't exactly trust you. How do we know that you won't just stab us in the back and kidnap my little brother when we're done fighting?" Naruto sighed. He had expected this. Given that many had tried to take her brother and use him as a weapon, she would be mistrusting of strangers or those who seemed to be helping them out of the goodness of their hearts without an ulterior motive. Naruto said, "Look, I don't expect you to trust me, but can you at least fight with me?" At least until you and your brothers are safe. Temari simply cocked an eyebrow and asked, why are you helping us? Naruto answered, call me a concerned third party in this little conflict. Now do you want to keep questioning me, or do you want to find your brothers? Temari simply scowled at the boy, but was cut off from her contemplating when the sound of an explosion reached her ears, as well as the sound of trees being uprooted. That made her make up her mind almost instantly. Meanwhile, Kankuro stood out with on one of his puppets out. You would recognize the puppet at Karasu Crow. On the ground, a few feet away, were the busted remains of his other main puppet, Kurori, Black Ant. Kankuro had learned quickly that this guy, who introduced himself as Raigan the Azure Dragon of East, was a master with his unique sword, and he lived up to his name of the dragon. The trident-like sword could grow and extend and move on its own like a puppet and be used to tear through targets. It was that very same move that led to be nearly destroyed. Raigan yawned and said, this has gotten boring. I think I'll just kill you now. He held out his sword and the blades extended in special segments. Water flooded out of the blades and formed a dragon head, one for each of the blade segments. Raigan smirked as he declared the name of his attack. Hydra. The three draconic heads launched forwards, all three of them ready to tear into Kankuro and stain their light blue teeth red. Wind release. Wind bullets. The trio of wind bullets shot out from the forest behind the puppet master in training, impacting the three dragon heads, causing them to burst into water. Kankuro turned and was shocked to see his sister and their masked ally. Raigan scowled and said, so you managed to defeat Kujaku and Tsuko. Oh well, I guess I'll just have to make sure those two learn what happens to failures later. I'll just have to take care of you three myself. Hydra. The water dragons reformed and launched forward the three ninjas. Kankuro and Temari jumped to the left and right, respectively, while Naruto jumped up. Landing on the back of the head of the leftmost water dragon and rushed forward, running on the back of the dragon. Raigan looked shocked and slightly angry. Manipulating his chakra, the dragon head turned and charged at Naruto. Naruto, in response, launched forward even faster. Realizing what his opponent was doing, Raigan simply smirked. He quickly went through some one-sided hand signs and slammed his hand on the ground. Water release. Geyser wall. Naruto smirked as a large blast of water shot up from the ground, most likely from the underwater rivers. Normally, a person would be upset when someone did something like this. Naruto was smirking because this provided him with something that he needed. However. In a sudden puff of smoke, Naruto was gone and the water dragon splashed to the ground. The dry earth becoming a thick mud as water gushed through the trees. Temari and Kankuro both jumped up, Kankuro taking his still damaged puppet. Raigan stared in shock, not believing what had happened, as the Garyan sword fell with a splat down in the mud. The masked ninja had just performed a substitution with his weapon. The green-eyed weapon specialist was drawn from his shocked moment when a fist slammed into his chin with enough force to send him flying upwards and making him fall to the ground. He got up, now splattered with mud, and quickly engaged the disguised Naruto in hand-to-hand combat. Temari stared in shock, not believing that such a risky maneuver had been shown. Doing so brought you into close range of your opponent and could leave you open to attack if you weren't ready. However, this guy used the shock value of the maneuver to his advantage. She glanced at her brother to see that he was still repairing his puppets and by look of it, he was almost done. Getting an idea, she opened her fan and swung it. With a powerful blast of air, a good amount of mud shot out and towards the fighting pair. Naruto, who was now grappling with the man, saw the incoming projectile and quickly disengaged, throwing the effeminate male towards the incoming muck. The moistened earth splashed against the man's face, blinding him. To add to his disorientation, Naruto moved behind him and clapped his hands over his ears. With a smirk, Kankuro finished his repairs and launched his two puppets. The boy launched Karasu, which opened up and trapped the disoriented ninja. As he banged at the wooden interior, Kuromi broke into pieces, its arms and head floating above the middle of the bird-named puppet with points aimed at the holes in the puppet's hull. Kankuro smirked before he made a motion with his hand. Secret black technique. Iron Maiden. The separated limbs and head of Kuromi shot into the holes in Karasu. The sound of beating stopped as a familiar red liquid began to drip out of the holes. Naruto held a small amount of bile down, still not entirely used to the idea of death. However, he managed to swallow it and handed another soldier pill to the puppeteer, who, after getting the okay from his sister, took and ate it. Glancing over at the Garyan sword, Naruto saw it vanish in a small puff of smoke. So now the boss has the two weapons we've seen so far, a busted piece of armor and whatever weapon he may have. This is going to be a problem, I can tell. That's 3 out of 4, Temari said, now we just need to find Gaara and their leader. Naruto discreetly sent out a pulse. Immediately, he felt the chakra signatures of Temari and Kankuro, even the small amount of fading chakra from Raigan and Kankuro's puppets. After a few moments of searching he managed to find what he was looking for. He managed to find them. He couldn't make out Gaara, but he could make out the forms of the captured Suna Kunoichi, whose name he didn't know, and the unnamed leader. However, what got his attention was the dome structure nearby. He could feel a familiar chakra. He could also feel that the One-Tail's chakra was steadily growing stronger as Gaara's chakra slowly diminished. As Naruto was trying to figure out where they were, Kankuro began to talk to his sister. "So, who is this guy anyway?" he whispered, trying to avoid being heard. "I'm still not sure," she said. "It's pretty clear that he's here to stop these 4 psychos. He managed to take down one of these goons single-handedly. Not to mention, he saved me from one of that hag. I think he is on our side, but we should keep our guard up just in case." The puppeteer nodded. As he has saved them, they were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. If it looked like he was going to turn on them, then they would act. "I found them," Naruto said, gaining the attention of the 2 siblings. Before they could ask, the disguised blonde shot off. Immediately, the siblings launched forward and ran after him. The path they followed led them to the edge of the forest, at the base of a cliff near a canyon. They found the final member standing there. As true to Naruto's sensing abilities, Mitsuri was tied up a few feet to the right, while to the left, there was a large metal dome a few feet away. Kankuro and Temari were quickly able to deduce where Gaara was. And judging by how the dome was starting to glow, they didn't have a lot of time. The man just glared at them as frustration started to fill him. The 3 pests had completely messed up their plans. His 3 teammates were dead, and the infinite armor had been completely busted. He would be lucky if he could scavenge some of the remains. Not to mention when Seimei was revived, he would be displeased to see that one of his greatest creations had been completely ruined. "You pests have gotten in the way of our plans," Hoki said, in an eerily calm tone as he reached behind him. Out from behind his back he pulled out his sword. However, it had changed dramatically. The large rectangular black blade had apparently been combined with a Garian sword and the Fujaku Hishimshinken. The handles had all fused. The blue 3-pronged blade of the Garian sword had fused into the blade of Hoki's sword, the middle tip ending just under the green orb at the top. The blades of the Fujaku Hishimshinken had merged into the sides of the blade. "With this I will end your interference with my plans," he declared, a glint of madness appearing in his eyes. "I am Hoki, the Black Tortoise of the North, and I am going to be your destruction." He swung the sword, releasing a wave of white red-tipped flames right at them. The group leapt upwards, landing in the higher branches of the trees. The flames blackened the earth, burned the grass, and reduced a few tree trunks into firewood. In the trees, the 3 ninjas quickly moved from tree to tree to avoid the potentially rising flames, the falling trees, and potential smoke inhalation. Temari quickly leapt backwards to avoid the flames and swung her fan. The powerful gust that picked up dirt, dust, ash, and fire. The burning cloud was launched toward sword-wielding maniac. The man simply smirked at the assault and swung his sword. This time, it was a massive wave of water that smashed into the cloud, busting through it, cooling it down, and sending it straight towards the blonde Kunoichi. The blonde quickly performed a substitution, replacing herself with a log to avoid the wave of water. Kankuro unleashed Karasu and Kuromi upon the swordsman. He smirked as the 2 weaponized puppets closed in on the man. Oki simply raised his sword and stabbed it into the ground. Peacock whirlwind. A twister formed around the man leader of the falling group. The puppets were struck with a massive wind, inflicting massive amount of damage. Kankuro managed to pull back his puppets before they were reduced to splinters, but he was quick to notice just how badly they were damaged. Naruto saw this and realized that with all the weapons combined, Hoki could manipulate water, wind, and fire. It also made him very glad that he made sure to smash the armor the Tsuko was wearing. He glanced over to the dome and could feel that Gaara was about to run out of enough chakra to keep the One-Tails at bay. He had to make a move and now. Thinking quickly, the disguised blonde went through various hand signs. Water release. Hidden mist. Almost immediately, a thick mist began to form. The mist became so thick it was hard for anyone to see. Naruto quickly began to suppress his chakra to help hide himself. It also helped that the mist was laced with chakra. After a quick familiar hand sign, 2 shadow clones appeared and ran off into 2 different parts of the mist. One clone was to provide support while another was to maintain the mist. Temari and Kankuro were both on edge. They knew that in the mist they were nearly helpless. The 2 siblings were now back to back, ready in case their mysterious ally decided it would be a good idea to betray them. Hoki laughed. "You think your little parlor trick will be able to stop me?" He performed the peacock whirlwind again, only for the mist to come back in full force a moment later. He tried again, adding more chakra for the same effect. He was now really starting to get frustrated. In his frustration, he didn't notice the original Naruto go towards the dome and focus a mix of fire and wind chakra into his pointer and middle finger. He placed it against the metal dome and slowly began to move it. He was slowly burning through the metal, using the fused chakra like a blowtorch or a welding iron. Inside of the dome, Gaara saw the light and could feel the chakra. He started to move towards it. Right now, he could feel the chakra of the one-tailed beast rising, and he could hear the beast ranting and raving at him in his mind. Meanwhile, Hoki was mentally ranting and raving about how the Sand siblings and the others wouldn't get in the way of his plans. How Seimei would be revived and the Takumi village would be revived as the strongest in the elemental nations. As he was ranting, he didn't notice Naruto, in stealth mode, sneak up behind him and grab Mitsuri. The girl looked about ready to scream, but a quick motion silenced her. She was pulled away from the madman and hidden in the mist. As the hostage was taken away, the madman snapped. "That's it. I've had it with you fools." Taking his sword, the man focused as much chakra as he safely could and swung it as hard as he could. The massive wave of wind chakra pushed away a good portion of the mist, revealing those hidden within it. Oki's eyes widened as he saw that his hostage was now gone and became enraged when he saw that Naruto was about to break through the dome. No. Get away from there. Oki swung his sword, this time launching blades of ice at the original Naruto, who had almost gotten through the dome. Kankuro and Temari both acted. Kankuro threw out his hands launching chakra strings laced with wind chakra, slicing through a few of the ice blades, while a blast of wind from Temari's fan knocked back the remaining blades. Oki was about to swing again, only this time, the shadow clone that saved Mitsuri intervened. He launched forward and slammed a kick into the still raised sword, knocking Hoki off balance. A swift barrage of impacts to the solar plexus, stomach, temples, and jaw incapacitated the madman. To add on, the clone that had been holding the mist quickly went through hand signs for a technique of his own. Boil release. White snake. The remains of the mist went together and began to heat up, turning into steam. The hot steam then launched forward and slammed into sword-wielding maniac. A loud scream of agony was ripped from Hoki's throat as a massive amount of pain ran through his body as the hot steam burned his skin, leaving bright red marks. The clone that engaged Hoki in combat turned towards his brother and gave him a thumbs up before vanishing in a puff of white smoke. The clone crossed his arms with a smirk under his mask and vanished as well. Naruto lifted Gaara up and smiled at his old friend from behind his mask. He quickly took out an enhanced soldier pill and gave it to the exhausted redhead. Gaara looked at the masked Naruto, then at his siblings who nodded. He swallowed the pill and felt some of his strength return. He nodded gratefully at the man who had saved the lives of him, his siblings, and of his student. Gaara soon found himself embraced by Mitsuri. Over to the side, Hoki glared angrily at the group. All his plans, all that work, all for nothing. He snarled angrily as he fought the pain of the steam-burned skin and slowly reached for his sword. I won't let it end like this. Lord Seimei will be revived. If I can't do it here, I'll find some other way. But first, I'll have to take care of these meddlesome pests. With a roar that was a combination of anger and pain, Hoki raised his sword and prepared to swing. Naruto, however, acted quickly. Swift release. Shadowless flight. Naruto disappeared and reappeared in front of Hoki almost instantaneously. Hoki froze as he what happened. Naruto acted quickly and unleashed the finishing blow. And sightless impacts. A barrage of instantaneous punches slammed into the sword-wielding maniac with bone-shattering force. Hoki screamed in pain as bit of blood came out of his mouth, the pain of his burns now multiplied by his now shattered ribs. The barrage was so powerful, Hoki was launched into the cliff, letting go of his sword, which fell to ground and separated into separate swords again. Hoki impacted the canyon wall with an insane amount of force. A large crack formed in the wall, making it crumble. Hoki's dying screams were all that was heard before he was crushed beneath the falling rock. Naruto glanced at the cliff and felt a small amount of bile rise in his throat for the second time during the mission. He had felt the ribs shatter under his fists and immediately felt sick, like when he had killed Tsuko. He managed to swallow his bile after a moment or so before turning to the swords. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out a sealing scroll and sealed the weapons. He even sealed away the remains of the infinite armor, figuring that they might be able to get something out of the armor. Naruto then turned to take his leave. Wait. Naruto turned towards Temari who had shouted. The Suna ninja had just fought through 4 maniacs and nearly gotten killed, only to be saved by the timely arrival of some mysterious masked ninja. None of them believed in divine intervention and they wanted answers. Who are you? Naruto turned towards his old friends and answered, I'm just someone who was passing through. With that, Naruto vanished in a blur of speed, leaving 4 very confused ninjas in his wake. Temari's eye twitched as she didn't get any answers. Kankuro, Gaara and Mitsuri both scooted away from the blonde girl before she let her displeasure known. It just raises more questions. A few hours later, at Naruto's training home. When Naruto returned home, he found everyone there, ready to congratulate him. Kushina even went so far as to make her own super ramen for Naruto, which consisted of chicken, pork and beef, all mixed together with specifically made veggies, thick noodles, and a specially made secret recipe broth. Despite this, Naruto didn't seem to be at the top of his game all night. He tried to put on a happy face, but he wasn't fooling anybody. When it was time for bed, Minato and Kushina decided it was best that they have a talk with their son. As Naruto was getting into bed, he was surprised to find that his father and mother entering his room. "Naruto, is there something bothering you?" Kushina asked as she took a seat on her son's bed. Naruto looked at her and his father, both having concerned looks on their faces. Naruto sighed and said, "Is it always like that? Killing people?" Minato answered, "Naruto, the first kills are always the same. You feel sick and you think yourself a kind of monster. Well, it's not pleasant, it is necessary in certain situations. If you hadn't, Hoki and his associates would have tried again and it might not have gone so well. Not to mention, if they did manage to resurrect that same A guy, we don't know what would have happened." Kushina nodded at her husband and said, "Like he said, killing isn't pleasant, but it is necessary in our line of work." Kushina embraced her son. Naruto was surprised, but embraced his mother. Minato got in on the action, embracing his wife and son. As the family held each other, a sense of relief filled Naruto. Naruto had just grown up some and was glad that he had his parents back. Cut. Okay, that chapter is out of the way. We saw Naruto's skills, and we got to see a little bit of family bonding over their chosen careers. Anyway, now for the unique techniques. Surging Fang's an original jutsu of his own make, Seimei uses this technique to create a large tiger out of water to attack his enemies. Depending on the amount of chakra he uses, the size varies. Tiger Scream based on the attack used by Byako from Yu Yu Hakusho. The Tiger Scream and a powerful surge of chakra formed in the mouth of the unlimited armor used by Tsuko. It is primarily charged with the chakra absorbed by his enemies, but he can charge it with his own chakra. However, it takes a lot of chakra to use, so it is mainly saved as a last resort. Great Stone Corner. This earth technique creates a stone blockade that forms a sharp corner around the user and those he's trying to protect. Naruto made this technique special to block wind jutsu, however, it is more effective against widespread wind jutsu as more focused versions can break through it. Phoenix Breath based on the victorious bird used by Rob Lucci from One Piece. Kujaku uses this technique to launch a powerful bird-shaped projectile strong enough to slash through trees. Paralyzing Touch, a lightning technique of Naruto's own making. This technique combines lightning chakra with the precision of the gentle fist and the hummingbird style. By striking areas Ontario A body, nerves are thrown out of whack and can result in temporary paralysis. Hydra based on the Hydra used by Magellan from One Piece. This is not an original technique, however Raigan can in fact use the Garian sword to create dragon-shaped water constructs. I just gave it the name Hydra because it fits since the techniques are so similar. Geyser Wall, a powerful version of the water wall technique, the geyser wall jettisons waters from the ground below, the blast causing damage to the attacker, as well as knocking them back. This is most likely best used in areas where there is plenty of water underground. White Snake, a bow release technique that launches a white stream of boiling hot steam at the target. The stream can be easily manipulated with chakra for near pinpoint accuracy. This technique can be used in conjunction with the hit and miss technique to drop the amount of chakra. This is mainly used to disable a target as the wounds make it hard to move and fight. Shadowless Flight, a swift release technique that allows a user to move at speeds invisible to the naked eye. It was based of the Shushin technique but is more combat oriented. Sideless Impact's another swift release technique. This is more combat oriented as the user uses the enhanced speed to rain blows down on his opponent. The result is massive injuries and broken bones and can even send people flying. Chapter 4. Nature Chakra and How Things Have Changed. Esi Uzumaki, here you go. Bankazin, thank you. Toasolaric, thank you. I can see how Naruto dying would be a catalyst for bringing peace. I think that it would have made a good OVA or even a good alternate ending. Inosuke Agagarvska Jundam, I can agree that Naruto's ending wasn't bad, but I feel it could have been better. Esi Uzumaki, that is an idea for the future. I may figure out how to do that. Ansuka, yes they are. Argrok, I'll try to. SPARK 681, I have some ideas, but no spoilers. And you, for the compliment on both stories. ALEXE 123, thank you, but be a bit more specific on what you liked about it. MARSHMAN 101, thank you. MARSHMAN 101 again, thank you. Lilikoli, thank you, but seriously be a bit more specific, if possible. AAGE88, glad to be writing again. AAGE88, good to know. AAGE88, thank you again. Sage of Chaos, well, here you go. Enshin no Shusha, glad you think so, and here is the update. Dama, let's just say, epic One Piece style reaction. Best ask and you shall receive. Naruto Kushina, glad you like it, and I do have plans for those who actually cared for Naruto. As for your Kakashi suggestion, I'll take it into consideration. NORRIS 321, glad to see you like it. Best, here you go. Elements 1999, my intention was to make it better. Best, I can respect someone's opinion if they think a story is boring or exciting. I know not everyone will like my work. However, I do have this to say. If you don't like it, don't read it. Anti-Shy Guy Ouija, thank you for pointing out the problem, and I've updated this chapter. I will work on the other 3 at a later date. Now, I know I want to get ahead of the game and try to get some ideas for Naruto's future guild members. If you have any ideas for characters, let me know. Chapter 4. Training continues, a peek at current events, and expansion begins. 2 months had passed since Naruto's first real solo mission. Since then Naruto has been training even harder. His morning workout had increased in load by adding various weights to his legs, arms, and back to make movement even harder. It would be easy at first, but as movement went on his limbs felt like they were weighing several pounds heavier. As the weights go easier to lift, she would add more weight to them. Naruto's chakra control hadn't improved much to the month, but Kushina kept coming up with new methods, like giving his mother a piggyback ride while running across water. She was also teaching him how to open his chakra gates. She told him that this was to be used a last resort, as the effects of doing this technique could be a serious problem if he used it in a fight too soon. He could only open 1 gate so far, but he was doing very good for his first attempt. His taijutsu training had gotten an overhaul, his father adding new katas. He had also finally gotten started on teaching Naruto the Flying Thunder God technique and integrating it into his fighting style. The first attempt at the use of the jutsu was bad as he immediately threw up, but repeated use got him used to the technique. That still didn't make it easy, however. The massive increase in speed caused Naruto trip and crash and gain a very badly twisted ankle. He was getting used to it bit by bit, but it was a slow process. His Jinjutsu training had gone from detecting Jinjutsu to casting it. However, Naruto's chakra control was far from perfect. He could still only cast minor ones, but Indra was still impressed with how the boy had progressed in that amount of time. Ashura had begun teaching Naruto how to perform half-seals. This way he could combine 2 different elements, like Scorch and Swift, into a powerful combination jutsu. However, the complexity made it very hard for Naruto to get the hang of, even with the shadow clone training method. However, Naruto was proving that this was his main point. In his spare time, his parents would find him writing notes on possible combinations, effects, and how they could be effectively used. It reminded them of how Minato was when they studied sealing together. Naruto's Fuinjutsu had increased by a good amount. He could make some seals and a few advanced ones, though his work was nowhere near his father or even the perverted sage's level, but he was learning rather quickly, much to his father's pride. Speaking of which, in the month following Naruto's first real kills, Naruto had started to spend a little bit more free time with his father and mother, beginning to build the bonds that would come with parents and their children. Naruto had just finished his morning workout. He went to go to his next teacher, but was instead shocked to find that Hagoromo and Homura were waiting for him instead of his mother for chakra exercise. What's with the change in schedule? Naruto asked, slightly confused. Hagoromo looked Naruto over and answered, Naruto, over the past year me, my sons, and my brother have watched you grow. We have decided that now it is time for you to learn the next step of your training, Senjutsu, sage techniques. Naruto blinked in surprise. The next step? Hagoromo said, you do know of the 2 parts that make up a person's chakra, correct? Naruto nodded and answered, yeah, the physical and spiritual aspect. Homura answered, correct. However, what you don't know is that there is a 3rd aspect, nature. Naruto looked confused. In response, the 2 brothers placed their hands together in seals. Markings appeared below their eyes. Immediately, Naruto felt their chakra shoot to the roof through his sensor abilities. The power that they were giving off was insane. Naruto was surprised by this and felt himself start to get excited. The 2 brothers then looked at Naruto. Humans are not the only creatures with chakra, Hagoromo said, taking his teacher mode. Chakra can be found in all living things and can be harnessed, like you've seen with the dogs of the Inuzuka clan, the insects of the Aburum, and the members of the various animal summons you have seen. Homura continued, however, it is not limited to just living creatures. Chakra exists in all things. The dirt, the grass, and the rocks all have chakra within them. We are going to teach you how to harness this power. Naruto was practically jumping up and down with excitement. With wide, excited eyes he said, what'll happen when I learn it, Tebeo? Shaking their heads at the boy's verbal tick, the brothers continued their lesson. Hagoromo answered, with knowledge of this, you will become stronger, faster, and more durable. Homura continued, all of your techniques will increase in power and range. Even your already impressive sensor abilities will increase greatly. Naruto was practically giddy with excitement, the massive bundle of energy he was coming out. However, he stopped suddenly. This all seemed a little too good to be true. Power like this always came with a side effect or a price. Naruto asked, "What's the catch?" "Like mom says, there is no such thing as a free lunch." The two smiled, seeing a difference in the Naruto from so long ago. He probably would have just jumped in without giving heed to the danger. Amura answered, "There are a few things you should know. First, you must stand completely still for the time you need to gather nature chakra, otherwise you will not be able to gather it properly. Second, because movement is necessary in combat, sage chakra cannot be replenished." Hagoromo answered, "You must also be careful about how much you take in. Using too much nature chakra can be dangerous." Naruto cocked his head to the side and asked, "What's the worst that could happen?" The two brothers looked at each other. Using their powers, a small tree grew out the ground. Hagoromo placed his hand on the tree to send nature chakra into it. Naruto was shocked to see the wood tree turn to stone, crack, and crumble away into dust. Amura answered, "Too much nature chakra can be dangerous to the body. If you cannot regulate the mix of your own chakra and nature chakra, you will turn into stone." Naruto paled slightly as he realized that this power came with quite a few perks as well as disadvantages. Hagoromo asked, "You are aware of the risks? Are you willing to learn?" Naruto was hesitant for a moment and then nodded. He was ready. Amura smiled and said, "Good. Then let us begin." Back in the elemental nations, Konoha. In the year of the death of Naruto's death, not much had changed. You would think that a ninja, who had affected many lives, would have had a bigger impact, however that was not the case. The village had managed to cover up Naruto's death with the story that it was Orochimaru's goons who had killed him and not their beloved Uchiha. As a result, the Wave Country, the Land of Vegetables, the Land of Birds, the Waterfall Village, and Spring Country all put out their own personal bounties on the snake. At the same time, some strain was put on the various alliances that the villages that Naruto had impacted. There had been a ceremony that several people attended, showing just how many people Naruto had impacted in his short time as a ninja. Each country held their own ceremony for the boy. Wave Country went so far as to put up a statue of Naruto with a plaque on it that read, "In honor of the boy who brought hope back to us." There was some minor fallout from this, however, from the Sand Trio. After they left, Shukaku spoke to Gaara, telling him about how he could smell Naruto's blood on Sasuke's arm. Unfortunately for Gaara, they couldn't try anything without causing an international incident. They had brought this to the attention to the Wind Daimyo. The man was slightly disturbed by this, celebrating the death of ninja of their own village. While the Wind Daimyo couldn't do anything, he sent this information to the Fire Daimyo, who was equally disturbed. He decided that he would keep a closer eye on his ninja village. He wound up coming down to said village a few days after the blonde boy's death. He was brought there to act as a judge for Sasuke Uchiha's trial. The daimyo was somewhat disturbed at how easily the civilian side of the council was quick to jump to Sasuke's defense, saying he wasn't acting of his own accord, blaming the curse seal on his neck. This didn't sit well with him and only made him want to keep an eye on his village even more. As the trial progressed, Jiraiya approached using evidence collected from Anko Mitarashi to disprove the mind control aspect. He also brought up a few mental evaluations from Sasuke's past that were altered to make it seem like Sasuke was mentally sound. The daimyo quickly ran a verdict. Sasuke was to have his chakra sealed and put under house arrest. On top of that, many of his assets were frozen until it was found he wouldn't do anything stupid. He was also forbidden from leaving the village. All of this was until further notice. During that time, Sasuke was going to undergo mental evaluations until he was deemed fit for service. The civilian council would have protested, but even they weren't stupid enough to go up against the daimyo himself. With the Uchiha case taken care of, Tsunade announced that she was stepping down as the Godame, an announcement that was met with a lot of shock and outrage, mostly from the Shinobi Council. Tsunade's stepping down was accepted by the daimyo upon hearing that it was only Naruto who convinced her to come back. The civilians would later find out that she took every cent of the Senju family fortune, jutsu, and everything that the Senju family owned. Well, everything except the kitchen sink, which she threw at the elders when they tried to convince her to stay. The civilians tried to get her for theft, but as it was her inheritance they could do nothing. After some debate, Danzo Shimura, Hiruzen Sarutobi's old teammate, was selected to be an elect for the position of Rakudame. In the year after that, not much had changed. The village's financials were fine as were their businesses. The relationships between their allies were still strained after so much time, but things were still fine. If you looked, however, you would see that there were a few extra civilians around the village. These were the personal spies for the daimyo. If anyone stepped out of line, the man would know. But the time skip information, we turn our attention to a familiar ramen bar. In this bar, the two were filling an order for some of their best customers, Konohamaru Sarutobi, Mogi, and Yuden. In the past year, Konohamaru had gotten taller, leaving him less likely to trip over his own scarf. Yuden's sinus problem seemed to have cleared up and like Konohamaru, he had gotten taller. Moig had gotten taller as well, and the permanent blush she had on her face seemed to be fading. The three still wore their traditional green goggles, showing their part in the Konohamaru ninja corps only around their foreheads. Yuden kept his protector on a belt, Konohamaru kept it in a brand on his left sleeve, and Mijegi kept it in a necklace form. "Thanks for the ramen, old man," Kono said with a smile after he finished the last of the broth. Gucci chuckled as he said, "No problem kid, just try to knock it off with the old man stuff. You saying it makes me feel even older." "Yeah," Kono said rolling his eyes, "see you around. Come on you two, we got to go." Mogi nodded and said, "Right." Yuden said, "Yeah." The trio then got up and left. In the past year, they had taken up Naruto's position as the resident prankster group. They found everyone who had ever mocked, made fun of, or celebrated Naruto's death. They were the victims of some hilarious but completely harmless pranks. Including, but not limited to, fish in the air vents, stink bombs, itch powder grenades, maple syrup and feathers, etc. Meanwhile at Training Ground 7. At Training Ground 7, we find a familiar sight. Three ninjas were waiting for a sensei. Sasuke hadn't grown much, but you could tell that his time in prison didn't change his perception at all. He was still the boy he was a year ago. Sakura hadn't changed much either. She still had her crush on Sasuke, but it seemed to have faded slightly over time. She was still a fangirl in her mind and would always jump to Sasuke's defense, especially when someone brought up the rescue mission from a year ago. However, her support didn't have as much vigor as it used to. There was a new character with them however, Sai Shimura, the adopted son of Danzo Shimura. Sai was of average height and was extremely pale, showing almost no emotion all the time. The man had less emotional range than Sasuke. Sasuke was tapping his foot impatiently as he waited for Kakashi to show up. In the past year, Sasuke's prince-like status had fallen. After his attempted defection, many of the shinobi clans looked upon him with suspicion. A few civilians were also looked at him nervously. After a couple of months, Sasuke managed to get his chakra unsealed and his house arrest lifted. However, he was still forbidden from leaving the village and he didn't have access to the Uchiha clan fortune anymore, only what he got on simple D ranks, which he felt were beneath him. After a few moments, Kakashi appeared with a familiar orange book in his hands. "Hello," he said, with a casual wave. Sakura didn't even bother yelling at her teacher, as she had obviously given up trying to get the man to curb his tardy habits. Plus, her respect for her teacher over the year had started to decline rather rapidly. Kakashi sighed and said, "Sasuke, come with me. Sakura, Sai, you two get started on your exercises. I'll be back in a while to check on you." The two walked off leaving the pink-haired girl with the pale, black-haired boy. This was another reason Sakura was starting to dislike her teacher. Now with the blinders partially removed, she could not look at Kakashi with respect as he always seemed to focus on Sasuke. In the past, she always said that Sasuke needed the training more, but after sitting in on a session with other teams, she was beginning to wonder why they even had a team if Kakashi focused completely on Sasuke. "So, shall we get started ugly?" Sai asked. The boy was socially awkward due to apparently being isolated for most of his life. Due to this the boy didn't have much of a filter when it came his conversations, speaking his mind to the point of being blunt and unintentionally insulting people. As a result, he was not popular, especially after his little conversation with Choji. "Shut up Sai." Sakura then proceeded to try and punch Sai, but unlike Naruto in the past, he didn't let her punch him. After 2 attempts Sakura stopped and simply stormed off to get some of her own work done. She certainly wasn't going to train in front of Sai as he gave her the creeps. Thus, began what was a normal day for Team 7. After Naruto's death, Team 7 had fallen from favor of the rest of the ninja teams, especially the Konoha 12 members. Between Sakura's slowly fading fangirl mentality, mistrust towards Sasuke, annoyance towards Sai, and disgust towards Kakashi, the team was the least favored amongst the 4 teams. Most of the team paid it no mind, but Sakura didn't. She saw the suspicion that was aimed at them and she didn't like it. Meanwhile Training Ground 9. The sounds of fighting echoed through the air. The sound of blows connecting, being blocked, and the sound of a body hitting the ground was heard all over. On the field you could see the members of Team 8 and Team 9 fighting each other. Shino was fighting against Tenten, his insects acting like shield against her various weapons. He was proving to be agile and smart enough to switch with bug clones. A good battle with 2 mid-range to long-range fighters. To their right, Kiba and Akamaru were both fighting against Lee, who was proving why he was considered the best in hand-to-hand combat. The two were currently brawling. Kiba attacking with his usual animal style, with Akamaru attempting to flank the guy. Lee was capable to anticipating his attacks and managed to deflect the dog. Off to the side was something that would have seemed strange to anyone who saw them a year ago. Niji and Hinata were currently sparring, their skills in their families' fighting styles matching and countering one another. Enough. The two teams stopped and they stepped back from each other. They were approached by their respective team leaders, Guy and Kurenai. Both teachers hadn't changed much in the past year, sticking with their usual attire. Lee hadn't gotten about a half an inch taller and he had gained more muscle from his training, which was visible through his suit if you looked hard enough. He was moving much better, having finally completely healed Bite Swan's hand before she left. A new addition was a Chunin vest, proving his advancement in rank. Ever since Naruto's apparent death, Lee had thrown himself into his training, saying that he would live for his fellow genius of hard work, Naruto. Ten looked about the same, but she was clad in a new Chunin vest, like her somewhat odd teammate. Niji was the same as ever, though his hair was slightly longer and he wore a Chunin vest as well. Gibba was wearing a Chunin vest showing his change in rank as well, but other than that and an extra half inch in height, he hadn't changed much. The real change came from Akamaru. The dog, which had once been small enough to ride around on Inuzuka Air's head, was now the size of a well-bred greyhound. This came from a mix of training and a steady Inuzuka diet. For Shino, it was hard to tell whether he had changed physically or not, only showing a slight growth in height. He had replaced his normal glasses with black goggles and now had a Chunin vest as well. Out of all of them, Hinata seemed to have changed the most. The girl was now about 2 inches taller, her hair having grown in length, now reaching her neck. Like the others, she had a Chunin vest on, over a black long-sleeve shirt and long pants. The clothes were not as thick, showing off her figure. During the past year, Hinata had thrown herself into her training. This increase in skill, along with actual praise from her father, led to an increase in confidence, which resulted in Hinata's change in attire. The change exposed just how much the girl had developed thanks to her years of proper diet and exercise, something that made two certain fangirls very jealous. I smiled and said, "My youthful charges, you have improved greatly in the past year. As such, we have decided that now would be the point where we begin your training in elemental chakra." The groups of ninjas muttered excitedly amongst themselves. I reached into his belt and pulled out a series of pieces of paper and raised it so they could see. This paper was made from a special tree grown and fed chakra. As a result, the paper from the tree will react to chakra showing your affinity. Fire will ignite it, wind will split it, lightning makes it wrinkle, earth will turn it to dirt, and water makes it damp. To show an example, Guy channeled his chakra into the paper, resulting in the paper wrinkling up and then bursting into flame. Kurenai did so with her own piece, only for nothing to happen. Upon seeing her look, the woman answered, "Some chakra doesn't have a particular affinity. Those people are best suited for Jinjutsu or other basic specialties." Each student reached out and took the paper. They all channeled their chakra and there were various changes. Niji's turned to earth with a portion of it igniting and the other becoming mud, indicating a triple affinity of fire, earth, and water. Tenten's didn't react at all, making her slightly depressed. Lee's didn't react either, most likely a side effect of his condition, which made Tenten feel a little better and made Lee feel depressed. However, he quickly pushed it down, saying that despite this, he would still become the best in the village. Gibba's turned to dirt, making him smirk. Shino's turned to earth before it ignited, indicating a double affinity for fire and earth. Hinata's piece crinkled up before a portion burst into flame and another became wet, indicating another triple affinity for fire, water, and lightning. Gosh. Hinata's and Niji's affinities are quite powerful indeed. Lee yelled upon seeing the two cousins both have triple affinities. "Aw, no fair." Tenten pouted, feeling jealous that she didn't have an affinity, while many others had 2 or 3. Lee patted his female teammate's shoulder and said, "Do not worry, Tenten. I know how innovative you are and you will no doubt be able to overcome this shortcoming as you have learned how to wield many weapons." Tenten smiled at her teammate's words. "Gosh, my youthful students. Now that we have a view at what your affinities are, we shall begin your training in the elemental arts. Come, we shall now the spring of youth turns into the summer of manhood." Lee immediately shouted, "Yes, Guy-sensei." The two then began their usual chant and hug routine, making the members of the group avoid the sight before them. To help stop any scarring, we shall move on. The Akamichi barbecue restaurant. Oh, that is some good stuff. Team 10 now sat in their usual spot in the establishment owned by the Akamichi clan. The 4 sat as they ate at a normal pace, except for Choji who stuffed as much food in his face as fast as possible, which was understandable given what his clan techniques required him to do. Over the past year, Choji had gotten a little bit taller and he had changed out his old clothes for some new red armor that vaguely resembled his father's and had let his hair grow out some. If you looked close enough, you could see the fat on his arms didn't seem to jiggle as much. After his little brush with death, he took his training more seriously, which resulted in some of his fat turning into muscle. Shikamaru had also gained some height, but he didn't change much other than that. He was still a chunin, but that was because he considered getting more responsibility as a jonin to be troublesome, no matter what his mom said. Ino had changed her look as well, wearing a purple outfit like the one she wore a year ago, only exposing her midriff. Something that had driven her father up the wall. "Easy there Choji, you'll choke," the platinum blonde said as she watched her teammate eat, with a slight feeling of disgust towards the glutton. "Why? You want to get back to Sasuke?" Asuma asked with a raised eyebrow. Ino groaned and buried her head in her arms. Ino had originally been on the Curse Seal mind control bandwagon. However, after Jiraiya's evidence and Anko's testimony, she fell off that. It also helped that when Sasuke was finally out of his home, she tried to go out with him. Sasuke rejected her, publicly and harshly, with a rant that left the platinum blonde in tears. With her image of the village prince shattered beyond repair, Ino turned towards her team and began to get serious about her life. For some time after this, her father was torn between doing a happy dance and tearing Sasuke's mind apart for what he said to his daughter. "Are you ever going to let me live that down?" she asked, with a blank expression as she lightly glared at her teammates. Toji and Shikamaru both chuckled as they saw the girl's frustrated look. Asuma just smirked as he took a drag on his cancer stick. The Hokage Tower, the Hokage's office. We changed the view to the Hokage Tower, where the 6th Hokage, the Rakudame, was currently going through some of his paperwork. Danzo Shimura. After Tsunade announced that she was leaving again, the daimyo came down to help choose and elect. Jiraiya and Kakashi were prime candidates for the position, but Kakashi was needed to help train Sasuke, and Jiraiya had his spy network. Danzo quickly got himself picked as an elect by stating that it was Hiruzen's way of thinking, a way of thinking shared with Jiraiya and Kakashi, that resulted in Konoha being in the state that it was currently in. Fortunately for Danzo, the daimyo was not a very forward thinker and was easily swayed by external sources. Soon after, Danzo Shimura was made the Rakudame. Over the past years and months, Danzo quickly made change he thought would help the village, including increased security around the village and setting higher requirements for the academy, including cutting out some of the unnecessary classes. A lot of civilian kids wound up quitting because things got harder for them. There were some of tougher stuff who adjusted and kept with the new curriculum. Speaking of the civilians, he had officially disbanded the civilian council, having no use for the civilians constantly fighting through the council meetings and how they acted out like they owned the place. Danzo instead replaced it with a single councilman, the civilian advisor, whose expertise were the various civilian businesses and the money coming in and out of the village, alongside the village treasurer. He had almost made a change in the budget with a bit more money going to the research and development branch. They were currently working on creating new weapons and tools for the village, but most of the tools were still in early testing and not ready for deployment or use. The biggest issue Danzo faces was Sasuke. He could see Sasuke had potential as a pawn in the future, given his one-track mind. Danzo had to resist the urge to chuckle to himself at the memory of the Uchiha boy. The boy was almost laughably easy to control. Just mention his brother or power and the boy would come running. Sasuke was a tool for Danzo's grand design, his Sharingan a potential weapon after losing Itachi to the Akatsuki. Sasuke would play his part much later, but for now the Rakudame would wait. Moving on from the past, Danzo moved to something that had him troubled. A little over a month ago, he had sent Kakashi to the land of rivers to assist the Jinchuriki of Suna so that they could help their relationship after Naruto died. He didn't understand the reason those two had such a bond, but he ignored it. The real reason was because of his interest in the four celestial symbols and their unique weapons. Kakashi's secret mission was to assist in taking down the symbols and then bring them back to the village so they could begin creating their own versions and produce them in large quantities. However, there was a problem they hadn't expected. The masked boy. From the report that came from Kakashi, from what the silver-haired pervert heard, the boy possessed incredible strength, skill, and power for his age. He was an excellent strategist, excelling in improvisation, with the use of special jutsu that should have only been accessible to a person with a bloodline, including the fabled swift release. Upon hearing that, he immediately thought it was the missing ninja, Haruko, but realized that he was more a scientist than a frontline fighter. The red hair made him think it was in Uzumaki that might have survived the massacre, but the abilities didn't match up, plus he was way too young. The chance of it being the spawn of a full-blooded Uzumaki was possible, however. He reached out through Jiraiya's spy network, the man not giving his updates as frequently as usual. Danzo tapped his fingers together in thought. Idly wondering what this man would want. You don't just put yourself in danger to protect a Jinchuriki, given their nature and how people would turn on them. Could he be a member of the Akatsuki organization from Jiraiya's report? Could he have been a member of some new organization? Danzo made sure to keep checking through his contacts to see if this unknown figure would show himself again. He had to be quick though, as he was not the only one looking. The bloodline rebels in Kiri were currently searching for him with what limited resources they had, in hopes of asking for his help ending the war. Suna was grateful for his actions and were hoping they could convince him to join their village. Kumo was also interested in this mystery man and hoped to get something out of him as well. Finally, Iwa was searching for him as well, believing that man with many different bloodline techniques could be of use to them. Maybe the boy would be of some use. Or he could be a threat. In either case, Danzo would be ready. At this point, the door to the man's office opened as his secretary entered with a large stack of paperwork. The bandaged man sighed to himself as he cracked his knuckles and grabbed his stamp and pen. As the woman left he mumbled, "I'm beginning to think that Hiruzen allowed himself to be killed. I don't even get why these people complain about all of this stuff." As Danzo filed his papers he was unaware of two pairs of eyes on him from his air vent. A small dark green toad and a white and blue slug, both watching with rapt attention. Mount Myaboku. The large mountain stood tall and imposing in the world, covered in what would resemble a swamp, with thick trees, marshy grounds, and solid rock normally attributed to mountains. There were large spires of rock with water pouring over them, creating rivers and muddy banks. Throughout the entire mountain, toads of all sizes, small, average, larger than average, and just huge, walked, hopped, and acted like there wasn't a care in the world. There were, however, a few other toads, dressed in armor, who seemed to stand by, just in case. In another part of the mountain, secluded from the rest, was a pool, filled with toad oil, that fell from a waterfall. Behind it, with a toad statue standing in the center, more oil pouring from its mouth, surrounded by various toad statues of various sizes and shapes. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of the oil falling into the pool. The sound was then broken by the sound of someone getting hit on the head with a stick. Jiraiya let out a cry of pain as he was hit on the head by a stick. With a frustrated groan, he turned the toad who had hit him in the head. The toad was large enough to stand on Jiraiya's shoulder. It was green with white hair that was styled to resemble a mohawk, with thick eyebrows and a small goatee. He wore a high-collared cape and in one of his webbed hands was a cane fit for his size. Off to the side was another toad. It had a green underbelly with purple its mouth and its back. The toad's head looked like it had a hairnet with hair rollers underneath, giving it an old woman look, which made sense since this toad was female. In order they were Fukasaku and Shima, the great toad sages. "Honestly Jiraiya," the toad sage said, shaking his head, "you've been at this for almost 3 months now and you still haven't gotten any closer to mastering sage chakra." Jiraiya sighed in annoyance as he rubbed the growing bump on his head. After Naruto died, Jiraiya had grown disgusted with how the village seemed to celebrate his godson's death. He left the village, having activated his Sanin travel rights. He immediately reverse summoned himself to the Toad Summon Realm, Mount Myaboku. Since Naruto's death and the changing of the prophecy, Jiraiya decided it was time to act, taking his training seriously both in sealing and the art sage arts. In the past few months he had made some progress with his nature chakra use, but it was a slow process. It was times like this that he wished he had some of his students' stamina or insane chakra levels. To make sure that Danzo would stay off his back, he made sure to send reports from his spy network. Of course, they didn't have as much detail as they did before, but it didn't seem to mind to the old mummy, as Jiraiya called him behind his back. Jiraiya grunted as he sat down in a meditative position and began again, Fukasaku raising the stick, prepared to strike if he needed to. Shima shook her head and said, "This is the last time for the day, Pa. It's almost dinner time and I'm making grub stew." The male toad elder licked his lips at the sound of his wife's cooking, while Jiraiya briefly showed a look of disgust. Shikatsu Forest. The damp bone forest could be described as beautiful. The forest itself was bright green, filled with thick trees that suited the forest's name. It lived up to the damp part of its name, as trees were soaked in water, leaving patches of mud and thick wet grass on the ground. There were trees tall with thick needles for leaves, other trees held delicious-looking ripe fruit. The air was silent, filled with only the sound of wind brushing through the trees, water droplets falling to the ground, and the smell of fresh grass. The silence however was broken by the sound of a female grunt and rock being smashed into rubble. Deeper in the forest we find a clearing. In said clearing Tsunade stood with her arms crossed under her large breasts as she watched with a critical eye. Next to her is a familiar pig, Tauntaun, and to her right is a very familiar slug, as large as a human with 3 blue stripes going vertically down her back. This was Katsuyu, the slug summons. The sound cracking rock was heard again. Following the noise, it was revealed that the black-haired woman was currently wailing on a large boulder. With each impact, a huge crack would form in the stone, sending dust and debris in certain directions. Shizune panted in exhaustion as he bent over trying to catch her breath. "Don't stop now, Shizune. You keep at it until that thing is dust." Shizune wiped her forehead of sweat and proceeded to continue wailing on the boulder. Tsunade smiled as she watched her young assistant turned apprentice. After leaving with Shizune, Tsunade reverse summoned herself to the damp bone forest to avoid any of Danzo's goons, not trusting the old coot that they decided to make the Rakudame. When they arrived at the forest, Tsunade decided to promote Shizune from assistant to apprentice, deciding that she deserved it after staying with her for so long and putting up with her attitude. Since then she had started teaching Shizune everything that she knew about her abilities as a healer, including her super strength. She wasn't the only one. She had worked with Shizune to attempt to conquer her fear of blood, or at least make it not as crippling, as well as gain some of the skills she had lost over years of drinking, traveling, and gambling. She was making good progress and was close to regaining the strength of her youth. As the boulder was finally reduced to dust, Shizune doubled over panting in exhaustion. Tsunade pulled out a bottle of water, fresh from one of the many springs around the forest, and gave it to her apprentice, who drank greedily. Tsunade said, "You did good. It took you at least 3 less punches to destroy the rock than you did yesterday. You're making progress." Shizune smiled as she panted. "Go relax and take a break. You've earned it." Shizune smiled and walked away, looking extremely tired. Tsunade then turned towards Katsuyu. "Your apprentice is making good progress, mistress," the giant slug said. Tsunade nodded happily and said that she has. "It makes me regret not making her my apprentice years ago, instead of just an assistant. She's definitely an improvement over Sakura." That was also true. Just before leaving the village, Sakura had asked her to take her on as an apprentice. Tsunade was tempted to give in. She heard about Sakura's impressive chakra control. However, she learned quickly that it was because Sakura had very small reserves. It also didn't help that she overheard Sakura talking to Ino about a fantasy she had about acting as Sasuke's personal nurse. Less than an hour later, she threw the idea of Sakura being an apprentice down into the incinerator. Tsunade was pulled from her thoughts when the sound of ruffling leaves reached her ears. Turning towards the sound, she was a slug, about the size of a horse, that looked identical to Katsuyu. It slithered over to them and gave what Tsunade perceived as a bow. "It is ready, Lady Tsunade," the slug spoke, also using Katsuyu's voice. Tsunade smiled as the slug turned around and slithered away. The Senju heiress followed. After a few moments, they approached what looked like a pool filled with what resembled oil. Katsuyu, the smaller duplicate of herself anyway, said, "It was nice of the toads to allow us to use their special oil so that you could learn how harness nature chakra." Tsunade answered, "Yeah, but don't forget, we had to trade it for a large amount of the fruit of the forest. I didn't even know the fruit here could be used to enhance stamina and strength." Katsuyu looked at her mistress and said, "Yes, but you have to remember that those effects are only temporary." Tsunade nodded as she moved towards the pool, walking over the oil with a water walking skill, and sat down in the middle of the pool in a meditative pose. It was time for the next phase of her training to begin. In the world between worlds. Naruto let out a groan as he sat down at the table to eat. The day had gone by slowly. Naruto's training in the use of nature chakra was going slow. The process was far more difficult than the blonde boy had originally thought. He had been struck in the skull by his 2 teachers and as such had a pretty good-sized lump on his head. As the blonde finished his food, he was suddenly aware of footsteps. Realizing that everyone was at the table, he thought it might be his fiancés. This only made him more surprised when a man and a girl he didn't know walked through the door. "So you're the brat that those 3 sisters told us about?" The man's deep voice resonated throughout the room. Naruto stood up and asked, "How do you know the girls? Who are you 2? The man scoffed and said, "So they haven't told you about us, have they? Figures they would wait until later to tell you." The girl slapped the large man on the shoulder and said, "Don't be so grumpy, you grouch. I'm Avis Vermilion, the first master of the Fair Tail Guild." "Hi." The man grunted and said, "I'm Bahamut, the dragon god." She smiled and said, "We're supposed to be your teachers in the future." Naruto blinked in confusion, not expecting this. Hagoromo stood up and said, "So you are the 2 that the goddesses mentioned as Naruto's future teachers. Well, I can understand that you want to start training him, we need a little bit more time." The dragon god scoffed and said, "I've been waiting for over a year now. I've waited long enough." Avis floated to the eye level of Bahamut and said, "Hold your jets, Baha-chan. They still need a little more time. Plus, you know what it's like to control a lot of power." The man grumbled something under his breath as he mumbled. I have to ask, who are these guys?" Ashura answered, "We are not entirely sure, but we have heard from your girls about them. These 2 are apparently from another world, like our own, but very different in many ways. They are apparently mages who use magic instead of chakra. At least, that is what Hikari told us." Naruto's other teachers, including his parents, all nodded, having heard from the 3 sisters about the 2. Naruto blinked and asked, "Magic? Doesn't that seem a little crazy? I mean chakra I can understand, but magic?" In response, Mavis walked forward and raised her hands. In a bright flash, a large wolf-like creature appeared behind her with a growl. The creature then roared angrily, releasing hot, disgusting-smelling breath in their direction. Naruto's eyes widened and flared his chakra ready to fight when he realized something. Using his sensor abilities, he saw the creature didn't have any chakra. Neither did Mavis or Bahamut, but whatever power they used, it was incredibly powerful, nearly matching Ashura, Indra, and Hagoromo. Mavis smiled as the wolf vanished. With a smile she said, "Are you a believer yet?" Naruto slowly nodded, unable to believe his eyes. Bahamut sniffed at the sight of Naruto's surprised expression before turning towards the boy's teachers. "Have you finished his training yet or not?" Ashura answered, "Naruto's use of nature chakra is progressing slowly but surely. If he improves, he may have this down in about a month, give or take a week." Bahamut sniffed and said, "Fine. You have 1 month and not a day more. Whether he is done or not, we'll be taking over his training." But that the two left, Mavis flashing a peace sign as she left. Naruto then blinked and turned towards his teachers and family and asked, "Okay, seriously, who were those guys?" Hagoromo answered, "Do not worry about it for now, Naruto. We officially have 1 month from today to finish your training under us, so eat. You'll need all your strength for what is going to happen." Naruto nodded and sat down, and he idly began to wonder just what was going to happen in his future now. Cut. Okay, so Naruto training in the use of sage arts has begun, taught by the two quarreling brothers. He has also met Mavis and Bahamut, his future teachers in the art of magic. We've also seen what has happened since Naruto supposedly died, as well as introduced a few things to the game that are different. Also, I would like some input on who you would want to be in Naruto's future guild. If you wanted to be a certain character from another series, you must list their magic, their abilities, weaknesses, and how their abilities would change in the world of Earth and Land. What if Naruto blessed by Fairy Kami in Fairy Tail, and thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.